Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Fusako Sano. Nobuyuki was born on July 15, 1962, in the Japanese prefecture of Niigata. He grew up in a wealthy family. His family's business, related to passenger transportation, was very successful, thanks to his 62-year-old father. Nobuyuki was a late child, with 5 half-siblings from his father's previous marriage. However, he is not really close to them. As a result, he grew up to be a spoiled and demanding child who always expected to get his own way, immediately. Nobuyuki often becomes aggressive when his expectations are not met in a timely manner. One notable incident occurred. He threw a tantrum in a store, punching his mother when she refused to buy him another toy. Nobuyuki struggled to form relationships with his peers due to his complicated and sometimes unusual behavior. He was also self-conscious about his height, which often caused him to hunch over. This behavior caused his classmates to tease him and give him unflattering nicknames. Despite this, Nobuyuki's family resided in a luxurious 2-story European-style house, which featured a spacious room specifically designed for him. The boy was uncomfortable in the room, fidgeting and expressing fear of being alone. This behavior led his parents to take him to see a doctor. After an initial review, he was referred to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with multiple disorders, a fear of the dark, a fear of germs and dirt, and a unique of autophobia, fear of loneliness, sociophobia, anxiety related to social interactions. Essentially, he feared both being alone and being around others. As a result, he became a loner in high school, never forming close relationships with classmates, and never having a girlfriend despite his attractive appearance. His peers avoided him, and he became an outcast. The only people he felt comfortable expressing his anger and frustration to were his elderly parents, who forgave him and tried to calm him down with gifts and money. As an adult, he struggled to hold down a job. He frequently got into conflicts with colleagues, neglected his responsibilities, and would often leave work in the middle of the day for no good reason, such as when it was raining and he felt sad. On one occasion, he intentionally hurt a female coworker, likely trying to get her attention out of sympathy. Although the incident was attributed to an accident, he was fired immediately. After being fired, Nobuyuki became unemployed and relied on his parents' financial support. Over time, he became increasingly reclusive, rarely leaving his room, and frequently clashed with his parents. Following a particularly intense quarrel, Nobuyuki started a fire in his home, nearly destroying the house and putting its occupants in harm's way. Nobuyuki was later admitted to a psychiatric clinic for treatment, where he was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, uncontrollable outbursts of aggression, and signs of misogyny, extreme dislike and hatred of women. After a little over a month of treatment, he was discharged, deemed not to pose an immediate threat to others. For a brief period, Nobuyuki remained calm and even began rebuilding the partially burned house, adding a couple of new rooms. However, his efforts were short-lived, and he eventually abandoned the construction project. Nobuyuki became increasingly withdrawn and isolated. He spent most of his time in his room, watching TV. He not only forbade his parents from entering his room, but also the second floor of the house. If they tried to cross this boundary, he would violently lash out at them, punching and threatening to kill them. In the spring of 1989, Nobuyuki began taking walks, but he preferred to stroll near a local school where he could secretly watch the female students. At first, he kept his distance and tried not to communicate with anyone. However, one day, he suddenly grabbed a young girl, who was only 9 years old, and threw her over his shoulder as she was leaving the school gate. He then ran to his car, which was parked nearby. The other children immediately screamed for help, and a school security guard and bystanders quickly intervened, rescuing she and detaining Nobuyuki until the police arrived. Nobuyuki was unable to explain why he attacked she, and it was clear that he had intended to commit a violent and unlawful act against a minor. As a result, he was charged with attempting to commit a violent crime against a child. Nobuyuki Sato avoided a long prison sentence thanks to his father's connections and wealth. In August, Nobuyuki was given a year's probation despite his heinous crime. Shortly thereafter, his name was mysteriously removed from the criminal prosecution database, allegedly due to his father's intervention. However, Nobuyuki's father died shortly after his son's case, dying of a heart attack. Nobuyuki was left with overwhelming shame and guilt for his father's sacrifices and efforts to cover up his crime. After the failure of his first kidnapping attempt, Nobuyuki, 28 years old, tried again a year and a half later. This time, he carefully planned the crime and remained under the police radar for an extended period. On November 13, 1990, Nobuyuki set out on a hunting trip around the city. In the evening, as darkness fell, he spotted 9-year-old Fusako Sano, who had stayed late after school due to a sports event, walking alone on a deserted road. Nobuyuki quickly pulled over in front of her, got out of the car with a knife, and grabbed Fusako. He threatened to slit her throat if she tried to scream or run away. Then, he forced her into the trunk of the car. After driving for a while, he turned into a vacant lot, where he tied Fusako's hands and feet and covered her mouth with tape. When night fell, Nobuyuki drove to his house and took Fusako out of the trunk. Nobuyuki led her through a part of the house that was still under construction to his room, trying not to be seen. He then left the room and re-entered through the front door, as if everything was normal. Once upstairs, Nobuyuki again threatened Fusako with the knife, ordering her to be quiet. He tied her to the bed and warned her that if she tried to leave the room, look out the window, scream, or cry, he would kill her and dispose of her body in the ocean, where no one would ever find it. Fusako was terrified and obeyed the kidnapper's orders, hoping that he would eventually take pity on her and let her go. When Fusako didn't return home from school, her parents started to worry. They knew she had stayed late to watch a baseball game, but as the sun began to set, they expected her to be home by then. Initially, Fusako's parents tried to find their daughter on their own, retracing her usual route from school to home, but their efforts were unsuccessful. As night drew closer, the parents of Fusako turned to the police for help, hoping for a quick resolution. Since Fusako's disappearance, only a few hours had passed, and they were anxious to find her. The police launched a search operation. And by the next morning, they were joined by dozens of volunteers from the local community. The following day, the search party grew to over 200 people, who combed the area, distributed flyers with Fusako's photo, and interviewed passers-by in search of witnesses. Notably, Nobuyuki lived close to Fusako's school and the police station. He had previously attempted to kidnap Fusako, which had brought him to the attention of the police. However, despite this, Nobuyuki was not considered a suspect in the case, thanks to the efforts of his late father. A large-scale search operation was initiated to locate Fusako Sano, a Japanese schoolgirl who had disappeared. The search lasted for many months, covering numerous locations such as empty buildings, houses, railroad cars, and vacant lots. Investigators also searched suspicious vehicles and combed through interstate highways, but found no clues. As the investigation continued, authorities considered various theories, including the possibility of involvement by North Korean special services. However, despite their efforts, the search was unsuccessful, and Fusako remained missing. Fusako later revealed that she was terrified during her captivity and followed Nobuyuki's instructions in the hope that he would eventually release her. However, her captor, Nobuyuki, had no intention of letting her go. For several months, he kept her bound with tight restraints that impaired her blood flow and caused her to lose sensation in her limbs. If she disobeyed or made a sound, he would punish her with a stun gun, beat her, or threaten her with a knife. Notably, Nobuyuki never assaulted Fusako in a sexual manner during her captivity. Instead, he treated her more like a possession or a pet, using her as a means of companionship and conversation. Nobuyuki kept Fusako captive, feeding her a meager diet of food prepared by his mother. As a result, Fusako became severely malnourished and weakened. He restricted her to her bed, forcing her to use plastic bags as a toilet, which he would then dispose of in an unfinished part of the house. Once a month, he would bathe her in a basin, cut her hair and nails, and dress her in his own worn-out clothes. Despite her compliance, Nobuyuki would regularly beat her for his own amusement. Over time, Fusako's spirit was broken, and she became submissive, no longer attempting to escape or even look out the window. As the years passed, Nobuyuki stopped bothering to physically restrain Fusako, and didn't even think to lock the door when he stepped out. He would simply cover her with blankets or towels. Occasionally, he would turn on the radio or watch TV with her, but only to programs that interested him, such as Scottish or sports matches. He also brought her comic books, which he enjoyed himself. These were the only things Fusako had to read during her confinement. For nearly a decade, Fusako was isolated, never speaking to anyone else or leaving her room. She remained in bed most of the time, hardly moving or trying to resist her situation. Fusako had become so resigned to her fate that she no longer attempted to escape or call for help. Nobuyuki's mother lived in fear of her son's violence. For years, she had avoided the second-floor room because Nobuyuki had threatened her with violence. This was not an idle warning, as Nobuyuki actually pushed her down the stairs when she tried to enter the room. She retired in 1996 at the age of 73, and her circumstances became extremely difficult. Nobuyuki regularly abused her, forcing her to follow his rules. Desperate for help, she went to the police in the spring of 1996 and filed a report, stating that she was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her son. However, the police seemed reluctant to intervene and persuaded her to withdraw her statement, advising her to handle the situation on her own. She also sought help from a public health center, complaining about her son's aggressive behavior and requesting that he be hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. Her concerns were ignored, and she was told her son's actions were not worth worrying about. Instead, she was advised to encourage him to seek help voluntarily. In January 2000, the elderly woman, exhausted from years of physical and emotional abuse, made a desperate call for help. She contacted the hospital and the police, requesting that they send a medical team and officers to her home. Her reason for calling was that her son, Nobuyuki, had brutally beaten her again, tied her up, and used a taser on her multiple times. Authorities finally responded to she's pleas for help and arrived at her house. When the ambulance and police car appeared, Nobuyuki became visibly agitated, aggressive, and resistant. He had to be restrained with handcuffs and sedated with a large dose of medication. Nobuyuki's mother confessed to the authorities that she lived in fear of her son, whose behavior had become increasingly aggressive and uncontrollable. She also revealed that she had not been allowed to access the second floor of her home for years, as Nobuyuki had forbidden it, threatening to kill her if she disobeyed. Upon entering the second floor and Nobuyuki's room, the police made a shocking discovery. A pile of blankets on the bed moved slightly, and when the officers peeled them back, they found a thin, pale, and exhausted girl hiding underneath. When questioned, she identified herself and revealed that she had been kidnapped by Nobuyuki while walking home from school a long time ago. After the discovery, the police brought Nobuyuki's mother into the room to ask if she knew the captive girl. However, she was shocked and claimed she had no idea that anyone else lived in the house besides her and her son. The kidnapped girl also claimed that she had never seen she before. During questioning, Nobuyuki made a shocking confession. He recalled the day he saw Fusako on the road and thought she was cute, so he decided to take her home with him. According to Nobuyuki, he took care of Fusako, feeding her, washing her, dressing her, and reading her comic books. He only punished her when she disobeyed him. Nobuyuki also admitted that he loved Fusako like a friend and believed she felt the same way about him. He had no intention of letting her go and hoped she would stay with him forever. He enjoyed spending time with her, talking to her for hours about soccer, music, or his favorite comic book characters, and she would listen silently. Nobuyuki claimed that he never locked his bedroom door, but Fusako never tried to escape, which led him to believe that she was happy living with him. A medical examination concluded that despite his mental disorder, Nobuyuki was able to understand his actions and thus was eligible to stand trial. However, questions were raised about whether his mother could be held accountable as an accomplice. She often bought feminine hygiene products for her son, which raised suspicions. Despite her repeated efforts to alert authorities and get medical help for her family, her concerns were consistently disregarded. The case drew widespread attention before the trial even began, the city police facing heavy criticism. Nobuyuki had previously been prosecuted for attempting to kidnap a schoolgirl. But he had managed to avoid suspicion when he carried out his plan. As a result, the local police chief and the head of the regional police department were removed from their posts for failing to control the situation from the start and making numerous mistakes. Nobuyuki Sato went on trial in May 2000. The prosecution thoroughly examined every detail of his actions, including minor offenses. Nobuyuki was found guilty and sentenced to 14 years in prison, the maximum term. He was released in the spring of 2015 after serving his sentence. By then, his mother had passed away in a nursing home, and Nobuyuki had no other relatives. He was found dead about a year and a half later, in early 2017, in a small rented room. The cause of his death was not disclosed. When Fusako was discovered, she was extremely weak and could barely stand. Doctors diagnosed her with exhaustion, dehydration, and muscle atrophy. She also stuttered, was afraid of sunlight, and had lost most of her communication skills. Her parents didn't even recognize their daughter when they saw her after nearly a decade. It took Fusako about a year to recover physically, but her mental health took much longer to heal. She suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and became withdrawn, avoiding people. Her intelligence was also affected, remaining at the level of a 9-10 years old child. Her parents took her out of town, changed her name to Sachiko Yamada, and refused to speak to the press. Over time, Sachiko made friends, took up photography, and even passed her driver's license test. In 2007, a family outing took a devastating turn when her father accidentally drowned in a pond she tragically witnessed. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shanynthia Gardner. Shanynthia Gardner was born in Memphis, Tennessee, in the late 1980s. Shaninthia's childhood was relatively ordinary. She was a beautiful, slender, curly-haired brunette with a talent for music and a creative spirit. She had a gift for composing songs and singing, which earned her local recognition and fame. Her love for music was just one of her passions. In addition to singing, Shanynthia enjoyed fashion and photography. She was a natural in front of the camera and had an artistic eye for capturing everyday moments. Despite her many creative pursuits, Shanynthia was also devoted to charity and her faith. She regularly attended church and prioritized her family's needs. Her life seemed to be on a promising path, filled with potential and possibilities. Shanynthia was 14 years old when she met Dur Clayton through mutual friends. They quickly discovered common interests and became friends. As they grew older and graduated from high school, their friendship evolved into a romantic relationship. They were perceived as a serious and stable young couple, but had some minor run-ins with the law, including traffic violations and disorderly conduct. In 2008, Der faced a serious accusation of assaulting a woman, although it was allegedly unintentional. Fortunately for him, the charges were eventually dropped. That same year, Shinthia and Der began living together, and they had a son. Shinthia took on a caring motherly role not only to their son but also to Der's 2 children from a previous relationship. Sonia Clayton, Der's mother, considered Shinthia a part of their family, not just she her son loved. Shininthia's devotion to her children made her special in Sonia's eyes. Although the relationship between Shinthia and Der was short-lived, they maintained some contact after the breakup. In Sonia's opinion, Shinthia remained a good partner and caring mother to Der. Shininthia's marriage to Martin Gardner marked a new chapter in her life. He brought joy and stability, and she won him over with her kindness and love for children. To Martin, Shinthia embodied feminine tenderness and wisdom. Shinthia and Martin's life together progressed quickly. In September 2013, they moved into an apartment in southeast Shelby County and started their life together. After their wedding, they welcomed their first child, Telone. The following year, Saya was born, and soon after, 2 more girls, Savi and Yazi, joined the family. In total, Martin and Shinthia had 4 children together, in addition to Shininthia's child from a previous relationship. For the young mom, her children were always the top priority. She enjoyed her part-time work at the Children's Hospital and was also actively involved in a center that raised funds to support children in need. Helping others was her true calling, and she dedicated her life to it with gratitude. Friday, July 1st, 2016, began like any other ordinary day. At around noon, Shinthia was speaking with her husband, Martin, over the phone. Her voice remained calm, as it typically was. She told her husband she was going to watch a movie with the kids, giving no indication that anything was amiss on this ordinary day. However, during a quiet conversation between the spouses, a sudden and inexplicable madness took hold of Shinthia. She grabbed a kitchen knife and entered the living room, where she attacked her 6-month-old daughter, Yazi. The defenseless baby was caught off guard and her life was brutally cut short by the person she trusted most. The eldest child, at just 7 years old, witnessed this horrific scene unfold before his eyes, unable to fully comprehend the tragedy. Panicked and desperate, he fled the house. Shinthia pursued him, still armed with the knife, intent on continuing her rampage. She chased after Der, but his terrified screams caught the attention of the neighbors. A couple of neighbors rushed outside after hearing screams and were met with a horrific scene that would haunt them. Shinthia stopped attacking Der when she realized she was being watched. However, the horror was far from over. Chania went back inside the house, where her children, Savi and Telone, were waiting. In a state of distress, she went upstairs to the bedroom where the younger children were, marking the end of their innocent lives. The witnesses quickly called emergency services, requesting help for Der and his siblings. At that moment, no one could have predicted the tragic outcome that awaited the quiet neighborhood. When the sheriff's personnel arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. Inside the house, they found 4 lifeless children, covered in blood. The sight was shocking. Shinthia calmly called her husband, Martin, and confessed to killing their children. The house was now filled with blood and horror. The investigators had obtained a bloody knife. Chaplains and specialists were called in to provide support to Der, who had endured unimaginable trauma and required immediate attention. The sheriff's department launched a major operation, cordoning off the apartment complex, including the golf area and country club. Shinthia was taken into custody without bail, and her trial was swiftly scheduled for July 5th. Despite the heinous nature of her crimes, Shinthia was still a mother and partner, someone who had once nurtured love, care, and joy. A friend of Shinthia, Michelle Jaiman actively defended Shinithia on social media, countering the unjust accusations and emphasizing a key factor: postpartum depression. The case sparked discussions, with Dr. Joel Rissman, a psychiatrist at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, noting that mothers killing their children is rare and often linked to mental health problems. Dr. Rissman also highlighted the state's insufficient mental health funding, which frequently leaves families without vital support. Dr. Diane Barnes, a specialist in psychology and postpartum health, clarified the distinction between postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. She emphasized that these are two separate conditions with distinct symptoms. Although the exact nature of Shinithia's condition required further examination, Dr. Barnes expressed skepticism that a woman experiencing postpartum depression would commit such acts, instead suggesting psychosis as a more plausible explanation. Dur's father did not believe Shinithia was guilty. Although he was not his son's guardian, he was able to visit him after his relationship with Shinithia ended, but this stopped in November 2014. He noticed Shinithia becoming more radical and controlling. His attempts to contact his son were unsuccessful, and he was excluded from his life. Those close to Shinithia noticed a significant change in her. She began experiencing discomfort, which turned into anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. Her behavior became unpredictable, and some suspected postpartum depression. This was a shock, as Shinithia was seen as strong and dependable. She had always been in control, but now seemed to be struggling. Shinithia's sudden change in behavior in March 2015 left many people baffled. At first, her friends and family couldn't understand what was happening. One day, she left work early, picked up her children, and drove them down an unfamiliar road, away from their home. Her husband, Martin, thought she was just going for a walk in a park, which was a normal part of her daily routine, so he wasn't immediately concerned. However, as the hours went by, Shinithia never came home, which worried Martin greatly. He decided to alert the authorities to look out for his wife, who was driving with their 5 children. Shinithia drove over 74 miles east, from Memphis to Corinth, but it's unclear why she chose that destination, as she didn't know anyone there. She was later found in the emergency room of St. Francis Hospital, but the police didn't explain how she ended up there. Shinithia had superficial cuts on her neck and one wrist. If she had attempted to harm herself, her children were the only witnesses, but they were too young to understand what was happening. Eventually, the authorities brought Shinithia home. However, her behavior became even more unusual after that. She told Martin that someone was threatening her and their family, which shocked him, as she provided no details about the supposed threat or who was behind it. There had been no previous incidents of this kind. When Shinithia was with family and friends, she began complaining about her job and workload, claiming it made her feel terrible. She soon started saying that some co-workers wanted to harm her. Despite these strange claims, Shinithia showed no signs of being violent or abusive towards her children or others. The investigation into Shinithia Gardner's case proved to be a challenging process. Craig Morton, her defense attorney, opted not to discuss the case with the media in its initial stages, deeming it premature for such comments. During the court hearing on July 5, 2016, Shinithia remained silent, appearing via video link. Despite being questioned by Judge Lambert, she refrained from speaking. Following the trial, Shinithia was transferred to the Mental Health Institute. Her relatives attended the courthouse but chose not to speak with reporters. Meanwhile, Morton's attorney and prosecutor Jennifer Nichols intended to file a motion to preserve evidence, including information obtained from social media. January 2017 saw Shinithia formally charged with 4 counts: aggravated child abuse, aggravated murder with a deadly weapon, another count of aggravated child abuse, and child neglect. The investigation into the mysterious and gruesome events continued, leaving the community seeking justice and answers to numerous questions. During the hearing, loved ones of Shinthia testified about the events of that fateful day. Sonia, Martin's mother, was shocked to learn of the tragedy and rushed to the scene to find her grandson, Der. Initially, she thought something supernatural was involved, but as the shock wore off, she considered possible motives. Sonia wondered if their potential divorce and fear of caring for 5 children alone might have driven Shinthia to commit the horrific act. The trial was significantly delayed due to Shininthia's multiple psychiatric evaluations. However, in 2021, the non-jury trial finally commenced. The defense centered its strategy around Shininthia's mental illness, while the prosecution acknowledged her condition but argued that she could distinguish right from wrong and understood the illegality of her actions. In December 2021, Judge James of the Shelby County Criminal Court rejected the defense's argument, and Shinthia Gardner was found guilty of all charges. 2 months later, Shinthia, 34, appeared in court for sentencing, accompanied by her husband Martin. Judge James sentenced her to life in prison for each murder count, plus 15 years for each count of child abuse and neglect. Shinthia can apply for parole only after serving 51 years. Considering the 5 years she spent in prison before sentencing, she will be eligible for parole in approximately 46 years, at the age of 80. After the sentencing, the prosecutor expressed agreement with the decision, citing that it aligned with their goal of achieving justice for Martin and his children. Upon hearing the verdict, Martin felt a sense of relief knowing that Shinthia would no longer be able to harm any more children. An evening vigil was held at the apartment complex where the family lived, attended by neighbors, family members, and law enforcement officers. The gathering was a tribute to the innocent victims, with attendees holding red and white candles and offering prayers for the departed souls. The Reverend Pastor of the Baptist Church emphasized that the vigil marked the beginning of the community's healing process. He noted that those present were united in their desire to support the surviving baby and his father during this challenging time. Der did not attend the memorial ceremony, with his grandmother Sonia explaining to the media that he was too consumed by anger to participate. The president and CEO of the Children's Hospital where Shinthia worked extended condolences on behalf of the hospital staff. Martin's colleagues created a social media account to support him with the funeral arrangements for his 4 children. At the ceremony, Martin displayed remarkable strength and dignity in his speech as he shared a few words about his children and family. He concluded by emphasizing that his home was once filled with happiness when his children and Shinthia were present, and that he would always cherish this memory. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of the Winkler family. On March 22, 2006, the small town of Selmer, Tennessee was shaken when it received terrible news. 31-year-old Pastor Matthew Winkler was brutally murdered in his own home, and his wife Mary and their 3 daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Mary Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, vanished without a trace. That evening, Matthew failed to attend the Church of Christ service with his family, which was out of character for the responsible pastor, who always informed others if he needed to miss an event. What's more, none of the family members answered their phone, which added to the growing unease. Concerned community members decided to visit the Winklers' residence to investigate and offer help if needed. When they arrived, the house appeared normal, with no signs of forced entry or anything suspicious. Inside, lights were on in several rooms, and a television was playing loudly in one room, giving the impression that the family was simply busy with their daily activities. The front door was locked, and despite knocking, no one responded. Phone calls also went unanswered. Through the curtained windows, it was impossible to determine if anyone was inside or what was happening. Although the situation was extremely unusual, no one was eager to contact the police. Instead, a community elder was called, and they advised searching for a spare key to let themselves in. An hour and a half later, community members finally entered the house and discovered an unsettling scene. Everything inside was in order, with no signs of intrusion, but the owners were missing. The scene seemed normal until they entered the master bedroom, where they found the pastor's lifeless body lying on the floor in a pool of blood. A massive gunshot wound in his back had caused blood to spatter everywhere, and dried blood foam covered his face. The body had already gone cold and stiff, indicating that Matthew had likely been killed that morning, as he was still dressed in his pajamas. The police conducted a forensic examination of the body and determined that the pastor was killed by a single shot to the back from a large caliber weapon. He died shortly after being wounded due to massive blood loss and was unable to call for help. It was impossible to establish whether any strangers were in the house at the time of the murder, as the people who arrived before the police had destroyed all evidence. The crime scene was unusual, and those who could provide information about what happened had disappeared. The fate of the pastor's wife and daughters remained unknown. The police suspected that they might have been kidnapped or also killed. In addition, the family minivan, a Winkler, was missing from the garage. A massive search was launched, and the state issued a yellow alert, which meant that children were missing. All citizens were asked to be vigilant and assist in the search. Matthew Brian Winkler was born on November 21, 1974, in Henderson, Tennessee, a picturesque country town. As the youngest of 3 sons, he grew up with his brothers James and Daniel in a conservative Christian family. Their parents, Dan and Diane Winkler, were very religious and raised their sons in a strict and obedient environment. Notably, Matthew followed in the footsteps of his ancestors, becoming a minister in the 5th generation. His father, great-uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler, and great-great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler Sr. were all preachers of the gospel at some point. His father, who ran the local preacher's school, was a respected and influential figure in their hometown. The Winkler brothers attended Sunday school and actively participated in church activities during their younger years. In high school, Matthew showed a serious interest in soccer, and everyone who saw him play noted his talent, predicting he could become an outstanding athlete of world renown. However, he later decided to sacrifice a promising sports career in favor of Bible study and church ministry. After completing school, Matthew's family lived in Austin, a small city in Texas. Although he was a creative person with a strong charisma, he did not have any exceptional academic achievements to his credit. After graduating from high school, he enrolled in Freed-Hardeman College and completed his studies successfully. While pursuing his college education, Matthew also started his ministerial career under his father's guidance. He served as the youth minister at the Central Church of Christ in McMinnville. Later, he was appointed to the preaching position at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carol Winkler was born in 1973 in Tennessee to a deeply religious family. Her sister Patricia, born premature, suffered from cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and mental retardation. Despite her condition, Mary was very close to Patricia, caring for her with kindness. Tragedy struck in 1987 when Patricia died in a bathtub after an epileptic seizure. Mary was devastated, blaming herself for not being there to prevent it. Teachers were concerned about Mary's well-being due to her deplorable state, so they sent her to see the school psychologist, who provided her with help. However, when her father found out, he caused a scene and prohibited his daughter from continuing the sessions, insisting that family issues should only be discussed within the family. In reality, Mary never received genuine emotional support from her parents. As a result, Mary grew up to be modest and extremely shy, always trying to avoid conflicts. After the tragic death of her little sister, Mary became withdrawn. Because her father refused to let her seek professional help, the unresolved trauma accumulated over the years, ultimately leading to severe psychological problems. Following Patricia's death, Mary's parents decided to adopt Charlotte, a young girl from a troubled and large family. Soon, they were also granted custody of Charlotte's 2 brothers and sister, and the siblings were reunited in their new home. Mary once again took on the role of the older sister, caring for the younger children and assisting her mother. Matthew and Mary Winkler met shortly after Matthew's high school graduation. Despite his popularity among girls due to his athletic build and handsome features, Matthew's strict religious upbringing kept him from getting too caught up in romantic entanglements. They quickly developed a strong connection, which soon blossomed into a deep love for each other. This was the first intense emotional experience for both of them, and after a few months, they introduced each other to their parents. With their parents' blessing, they began making wedding plans. They tied the knot in April 1994. When their first child, Patricia, was born, Matthew was still in college and had to take a temporary break from his studies. He got a job at a construction site, but didn't last long due to his inability to cope with the physical demands. During this period, Matthew's volatile personality began to emerge. He would often get irritable and angry over small things, and sometimes struggled to control his temper. However, Mary chose not to complain or share their family issues with others. As a meek and obedient young woman, raised in a patriarchal environment, she followed her husband's lead in every aspect. At first, Mary's family lived close to her parents' house, allowing her to visit them often. However, Mrs. Freeman, Mary's mother, was soon diagnosed with cancer, which progressed rapidly and took her life within a few months. This was another devastating blow for Mary, who was left to care for her younger siblings. To make matters worse, Mary was pregnant again at the time. Shortly after giving birth to her second daughter, the family relocated to a new city, where they purchased a small house of their own. After the move, Mary became fully devoted to caring for her newborn, and as a result, her relationships with her father and younger siblings began to deteriorate as they required constant attention. Furthermore, Mary struggled with severe postpartum depression. Everyone familiar with the Winkler family noticed Mary's peculiarities. She was introverted and even socially anxious, avoiding interaction with others. Forming new connections, let alone friendships, was a struggle for her. Her mood would shift frequently, and she was prone to melancholy, with even the smallest thing capable of moving her to tears. As Matthew's pastor career advanced, Mary became increasingly withdrawn. The situation grew more complicated when she became pregnant again, only to learn months later that the fetus had died. This devastating news deeply disturbed Mary, who had been eagerly anticipating the child and dreaming of a large, loving family. It took 2 years for her to see the long-awaited positive pregnancy test, and her joy was overwhelming. However, this time around, Mary concealed her pregnancy for a long time, as if fearful of something. Mrs. Winkler's strange behavior stemmed from childhood trauma and an unhealthy upbringing. Her husband, the family head, was authoritarian, demanding obedience. Behind the facade of a perfect couple, he was violent, often yelling at her without reason. The rumors of the pastor's cruelty spread after Mary appeared with a black eye. Matthew's urge for role-playing and adult toys clashed with Mary's conservative upbringing. She resisted, enraging him, and he tried to force his desires. After abuse, Mary confided in a friend who betrayed her trust, fueling rumors about the clergyman's behavior. Matthew was denied a church leadership promotion and forced to step down from teaching Sunday school due to unfavorable rumors about his personal preferences. His family had to relocate to a new city, where they started fresh. In Selmer, Matthew became a pastor again, and his wife took a part-time job. Despite challenges, they earned the admiration and respect of their community, seen as an exemplary couple and model family. The Winkler family and their neighbors became close friends, often visiting and sharing holidays. Months before the tragedy, Mary bragged about her husband buying a gun for self-defense and taking her to the shooting range. She learned quickly and accurately hit targets. It came out that the Winklers already had guns at home, bought by the pastor for self-defense, which puzzled the guests since they lived in a peaceful town with no enemies. After another move, the couple's financial situation became precarious. Mary sought out various part-time jobs and decided to pursue a medical degree, aiming to work in a clinic and help children in need. However, she soon turned to financial fraud to improve their family's financial standing. Mary later claimed she didn't realize her actions were illegal and intended to pay back the money once she got back on her feet. What Mary did is commonly known as artificially inflating account balances. She received checks from unknown sources, deposited them into a joint bank account with her husband, and then changed the account address so that all communications would be sent there. The total amount of checks received was nearly $177,000, which raised suspicions among bank employees. They invited the couple to the bank branch to clarify the situation, but the Winklers never showed up, further fueling suspicion. Although it was assumed that Matthew was unaware of his wife's actions after his death, Mary tried to convince the court that the fraud was his idea and that he had forced her to make shady transactions while he remained in the background to avoid detection. Mary's disappearance sparks suspicion. Her family's in danger after her husband's murder, and she's initially seen as a victim. But after neighbors' accounts and fraud evidence, she becomes the prime suspect. Authorities must find her, her kids, and the family car to ensure their safety. They're tracing her bank transactions and cell phone signal. Mary was discovered the following day in an Alabama resort town where she was enjoying quality time with her children at a local amusement park. Apparently, she had planned a special day for them, aware that her impending imprisonment would separate her from her daughters for an extended period. Upon being taken to the police station to provide statements, they recounted a consistent and confident narrative. They claimed that intruders had broken into their home, assaulting their father, and their mother had armed herself to protect them. According to the girls, they were then forced to flee for their safety. Their father was still alive and in the hospital, and they were about to visit him. However, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not witness the events that unfolded in the house. All they knew was that they heard a gunshot, caught a glimpse of their father lying on the floor, and then their mother quickly got them into the car and they drove away. Mary soon began to confess, but claimed she couldn't recall the exact sequence of events due to a temporary memory lapse. According to her, her husband had been abusing her for years, humiliating her and pressuring her into intimate acts that went against her wishes. Mary maintained that it was he who had initiated the financial fraud she had committed. Matthew was known for demanding absolute obedience, had a short temper, and had a history of physical violence, as confirmed by his secretary at his previous job. The woman had frequently witnessed the pastor belittle his wife, who would carefully bring him lunch to church, only to be met with dissatisfaction. The evening before the tragic event, a scandal erupted in the family, prompting the couple to sleep in separate rooms. Mary was distraught, crying throughout the night, and in the morning, she found herself holding a loaded shotgun, which her husband habitually kept at the ready. She entered Matthew's room, where she shot him in the back while he lay in bed. Matthew collapsed to the floor, bloodied foam emanating from his mouth and nose. According to Mary, as her husband lay dying, he whispered, "Why?" To which she responded, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Mary then gathered her daughters and fled the house, leaving her husband, who, as experts later determined, tried to reach for the phone to call for help, but lacked the strength to do so. The murder weapon was later discovered in the trunk of the car in which Mary escaped with the children. However, at the trial, Mary was unable to explain why she had taken the gun with her. The role-playing costumes found in their home were presented as evidence of the pastor's emotional abuse and humiliation of his wife. When Mary saw them, she turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite her inconsistent testimony, the court ultimately believed that Mary Winkler was the victim of domestic abuse and that the murder was a culmination of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, this did not excuse her from taking responsibility for her actions. In April 2007, the court finally delivered its verdict in this complex case. Mary was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but the sentence sparked controversy due to her questionable mental state. Initially, she was expected to serve at least 6 years in prison, but ultimately received a sentence of less than a year. During her sentence, she spent 2 months in a psychiatric hospital where doctors assessed her ability to regain custody of her children. Upon her release in the summer of 2008, Mary was granted sole custody of her daughters, who had been living with their paternal grandparents. Matthew's parents were outraged, believing that Mary had deliberately killed their son and received a lenient sentence. They felt she should not have been given custody of the girls, but all their attempts to appeal the decision failed. The fraud case was never brought to trial because the bank failed to file formal charges, and as a result, the matter was completely dropped. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Mackenzie Shirilla. Mackenzie Shirilla was born in August 2004 in Strongsville, Ohio, the third of 3 children. Her parents, John Shilla and Natalie Stevens, made a conscious effort to raise their children with love, care, and a good education, always encouraging their endeavors. As the youngest daughter, Mackenzie was often spoiled and got away with many mischievous acts, including serious offenses, due to her parents' leniency. As she grew up, Mackenzie became a demanding and selfish individual. She was accustomed to getting her way and believed she was above consequences, no matter her actions. Classmates and teachers observed that Mackenzie was a pleasant and open child in her early years, but as she aged, her behavior and character began to deteriorate. She would throw tantrums when things didn't go her way, lost her temper easily, was impudent and impatient, used foul language, and was even known to get into physical altercations. Mackenzie refused to consider anyone else's opinions, always believing her own view to be the only one that mattered, and prioritized her own interests above all else. In her teenage years, Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly unbearable, but her parents turned a blind eye, attributing it to adolescence and believing that she needed understanding and patience. However, her defiant nature was only the tip of the iceberg. She developed a drinking problem in high school and occasionally dabbled in illegal substances, often getting away with it. Her reckless actions posed a direct threat not only to herself, but also to those around her. Despite this, her parents either failed to notice or chose to ignore the obvious issue. Like many of her peers, Mackenzie was obsessed with social media, rarely putting her phone down. She frequently posted provocative photos of herself smoking or drinking on her account, accompanied by equally provocative comments. Her friends were similar, and together they engaged in vandalism, organized fights, and occasionally stole from others, even catching the attention of the police on several occasions. However, they were merely given warnings and educational talks, which reinforced their belief that they were above the law. Dominic Russo, born in September 2001, was the 4th of 7 children to Frank and Christine Russo in Strongsville. Growing up in a close-knit family with 3 brothers and 3 sisters, Dominic received ample love, attention, and care despite being part of a large family. He excelled academically, actively participated in sports from a young age, and maintained a healthy lifestyle. His parents, Frank and Christine, struck a balance between being moderately strict and encouraging their children's overall development. As a result, Dominic was popular among his peers, often drew attention, and was known for his bright and attractive appearance. Focusing on meaningful connections, Dominic avoided casual relationships. After high school, he enrolled in a local university to pursue a degree in performing arts production, aiming to make a name for himself in the music industry. Dominic was a talented young man who wrote and performed his own songs. By the age of 20, Dominic had achieved significant milestones, establishing his own small business, buying a car, and renting a spacious apartment in a desirable neighborhood. He continued to excel in sports and was regarded as one of the top students at the university. Dominic and Mackenzie first met at a party surrounded by mutual friends when she was in her graduating class. This chance encounter proved to be a pivotal moment in their lives. As total opposites, they were instinctively attracted to each other. Dominic, a handsome young man with curly hair and a passion for music, immediately caught Mackenzie's attention. Unlike the guys she usually hung out with, he was educated, well-mannered, and interesting, able to converse on various topics. Mackenzie, a stunning woman with a slim figure and impeccable style, knew how to make a lasting impression. She turned on her charm to grab Dominic's attention, which she quickly achieved. The two started dating in the fall of 2021 and soon introduced each other to their parents. While Mackenzie's parents were thrilled with her choice and thought Dominic was perfect for their daughter, Dominic's parents, Frank and Christine Russo, had mixed feelings about Mackenzie. On the surface, she appeared sweet and innocent, trying to impress them, but something about her raised their suspicions. Mackenzie's friends and family believed she had genuinely fallen in love for the first time and hoped her relationship with Dominic would positively impact her character and behavior. At the time, no one could have predicted the tragic outcome of this romance. They quickly became inseparable, regularly holding hands and openly showing their affection in public. As a result, it didn't take long for the news of their relationship to spread throughout the small town. While those closest to Mackenzie felt sympathy for her boyfriend, most people were genuinely happy for they. However, Dominic soon realized that something was off. He began to notice strange behaviors in Mackenzie, such as her frequent outbursts of defiance and her insistence on getting her way in all interactions. At first, he didn't give it much thought, attributing it to her young age and desire for attention. They started making plans for their future together, including discussing marriage once Mackenzie turned 18. They also planned to leave their hometown and move to a major city, ideally New York, where Dominic could pursue a successful music career. As time went on, Mackenzie's behavior grew more and more unsettling, sometimes even scaring Dominic. She demanded that her boyfriend give in to her every demand, and when he refused, she would throw tantrums, acting like a spoiled kid. At first, Dominic tried to brush off her outbursts as a joke, but soon realized that this was the real personality of the woman he was dating. While she was able to keep up a good front in public, when they were alone, she would let loose a flood of emotions and even get physically violent. Mackenzie's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading the young man to decide he'd had enough. He suggested they take a break to allow her to sort out her feelings, but this triggered a public outburst in front of their mutual friends. Mackenzie screamed, threatened to kill him if he left, and vowed to burn down his house and wreck his car. However, this dramatic display only reinforced his conviction that ending their toxic relationship was the right decision. Despite this, Mackenzie was determined to hold on to her boyfriend. She continued to call him, inviting him to parties and posting photos of them on social media with declarations of love. When Dominic made it clear that everything was over, she flew into a rage. Mackenzie began showing up at his house almost daily, yelling insults and threats under his windows. She called him from different numbers, left messages on his answering machine, and sent emails and social media posts. One moment, she'd swear her love and offer to start anew. The next, she'd descend into insults and threats once again. Dominic was utterly bewildered by Mackenzie's behavior, which he had never experienced before. He attempted to engage in conversation with her, ignoring her, and even recording her aggressive outbursts on his phone. However, Mackenzie's conduct escalated to the point where she would publicly confront Dominic, screaming and insulting him in front of bystanders. This turned his life into a living hell, but he still held on to the hope that with time, she would lose interest and move on to someone else. One day, in the presence of witnesses, Mackenzie brazenly declared that killing Dominic would be easier than letting him go. She threatened that if he didn't return to her, no one else would have him, and she would take care of it. Although Dominic didn't take her threats seriously, Those around him recognized that Mackenzie was dead serious. The schoolgirl frequently issuing menace included promises to physically assault him, run him over with a car, kidnap him and drive off a cliff, or stop the car on train tracks in front of an oncoming train. Each sinister scenario was described in vivid detail, as if Mackenzie had meticulously planned it and was waiting for the perfect moment to execute it. Mackenzie realized that threatening and insulting Dominic wasn't getting him back, but rather pushing him away. So she changed her approach. She became sweet and charming once more, stopped pressuring and harassing him, and pretended to have learned from her mistakes, wanting to improve herself for the better. She brought up the upcoming university enrollment, asking for his help in choosing a university, and even claimed to be worried about her final exams. Dominic was pleasantly surprised by these changes and, despite everything, still had feelings for his former girlfriend. He decided to help her with enrollment, simply out of kindness. As a result, they started seeing each other and communicating again. They grew closer over time. Dominic began inviting Mackenzie on dates and sought to spend all his free time with her, believing she had changed, matured, and become more responsible. Without realizing it, he fell in love with her again, and all past grievances were forgotten. This time, however, they didn't rush to announce their reunion to friends and acquaintances. Their meetings were more like secret dates, where they simply enjoyed each other's company, avoiding the scrutiny of others. When Dominic's brother Angelo found out what was going on, he warned that their relationship would not end well. But Dominic, being deeply in love, ignored his brother's caution. Meanwhile, Mackenzie, who was obsessed with Dominic, devised a terrifying plan to take revenge on him. She began to fantasize about a high-speed car crash and spent hours driving around the city to find the perfect spot to put her plan into action. Since there were no steep cliffs nearby, she considered targeting a train on the tracks, but eventually decided it was too unreliable. One day, Mackenzie drove into a secluded industrial area with no cameras and very few cars. There, she spotted a massive brick wall, which sparked a new, equally horrific plan in her mind. She decided that if she drove at maximum speed and crashed into the wall, it would be just as sensational as plunging off a cliff. Initially, Mackenzie intended to die alongside Dominic, hoping their tragic story would be told and retold by everyone in the city. She even confided in her best friend, but her friend didn't take her seriously, thinking it was just another empty threat. Mackenzie had made similar claims before, but never followed through. In late July 2022, Mackenzie suggested to her boyfriend Dominic that they attend an upcoming party hosted by their mutual friends, just a week shy of her 18th birthday. The party would be a perfect opportunity for them to have fun, unwind, and publicly showcase their rekindled romance. Dominic agreed, still trusting Mackenzie's sincerity and intentions. The party took place on Saturday, July 30th. Mackenzie and Dominic arrived hand in hand, immediately drawing attention from the other guests. They looked happy, smiled, and openly displayed their affection for each other. Their friends were genuinely delighted with their reunion, noting that they made a lovely and harmonious couple. Throughout the evening and night, the young pair had a blast, happily took photos, and unhesitatingly kissed in front of everyone. Little did anyone know, this joyful celebration would soon turn into a devastating tragedy. Like the other partygoers, they had a few drinks, but Mackenzie secretly took an illegal drug to boost her courage and avoid getting cold feet. The next morning, Mackenzie and Dominic bid farewell to their friends and headed to their car, but Dominic's friend Dave requested a ride home. Mackenzie initially objected, citing their own plans, but Dominic saw no issue with giving his friend a lift, not wanting to arouse suspicion or alter their plans. Mackenzie reluctantly agreed, despite her reservations about the change in plans. Mackenzie got behind the wheel, her boyfriend sat in the passenger seat, and her friend sat behind him. With a slow and quiet start, the car pulled away from the party venue and headed onto Main Street. Mackenzie drove cautiously, keeping to the speed limit and avoiding drawing attention to herself. At a stoplight, she came to a halt, even though the road was empty. As her passengers dozed off, Mackenzie reconsidered her plan. She would later claim that she wanted to die in the accident, but this seems unlikely since she had fastened her seatbelt during the last stop, while her passengers remained unbuckled. When the light turned green, she accelerated quickly, taking a sharp turn onto a poorly lit secondary road that led into an industrial area. The guys were caught off guard, seemingly unaware of what was happening. The car sped up to its top speed, but Mackenzie continued to floor it, steering the vehicle straight into a blank brick wall. The crash occurred in the deserted industrial area early Sunday morning, with no witnesses or good Samaritans to help. However, a woman living on the outskirts, near the accident site, heard the impact and went outside to investigate. She saw smoke and, upon closer inspection, realized that a car had crashed. After the accident, she rushed back inside to call emergency services. About half an hour later, medics arrived at the scene, but unfortunately, the two men in the car had died instantly. The girl driving the car, however, was still alive, thanks to her seatbelt and airbags. Mackenzie was unconscious, with her legs trapped in the wreckage, but she was breathing and had a palpable pulse, giving hope that she would survive. During the rescue process, she occasionally opened her eyes, but seemed unaware of her surroundings. Mackenzie was rushed to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed her with multiple fractures and internal organ damage. Blood tests revealed that she had been under the influence of both alcohol and drugs at the time of the accident. Ironically, the doctor believed that this may have helped prevent her from dying from shock while waiting for help to arrive. The police investigation initially suggested that Mackenzie, while under the influence, might not have realized what she was doing, and perhaps tried to drive through the wall or didn't see any obstacles. This theory was supported by the lack of braking distance. However, Mackenzie was unable to provide further insight as she was unconscious in the intensive care unit following a complex operation. Mackenzie regained consciousness and, overcome with emotion, confessed to the doctor on duty. She explained that she had intentionally driven into the wall at high speed, intending to kill her boyfriend and die with him. She clarified that Davin was an unintended victim, only in the car because of his own obsession, having asked to accompany them. Investigations revealed a different story. Surveillance footage tracked the initial part of the car's route, showing Mackenzie driving cautiously and following traffic rules, until she suddenly turned onto a road leading to an industrial area. Moreover, evidence emerged that Mackenzie had driven the entire route in both directions several days prior, with her car spotted by at least a dozen witnesses at various times. After leaving the hospital, Mackenzie bounced back quickly and resumed her carefree life. She socialized with friends, made future plans, and even attended a concert in a wheelchair, posting selfies on social media. By Halloween, she was back on her feet and dressed in costume, living life to the fullest. Mackenzie was arrested on November 4, 2022. The investigation took just over 3 months to gather evidence and build a case against her. She was charged with premeditated aggravated double murder and possession of a controlled substance, which was found in her pocket and detected in her blood. During the trial, Mackenzie changed her story multiple times. Initially, she claimed to have suffered a memory lapse, but after a friend testified against her, revealing her plan, Mackenzie shifted her defense, stating she wanted to die with her lover. However, this new claim was quickly disputed, as evidence showed she had worn a seatbelt. On August 21, 2023, the jury found Mackenzie guilty on all charges. Although she was convicted, the court took into account that she was not yet 18 years old at the time of the crime, only 5 days shy of her 18th birthday. As a minor under state law, she was eligible for a more lenient sentence. Mackenzie faced 2 consecutive 15-year sentences without parole for each murder. However, due to her youth, her sentences were allowed to run concurrently, making her eligible for parole in 15 years. At the time of her potential release, Mackenzie will be 33 years old. The court's decision left both sides dissatisfied. The families of the deceased youths announced their intention to appeal for a harsher punishment, while Mackenzie's lawyer felt the sentence was too severe and also appealed. Despite this, the judge refused to modify the sentence, stating that he doubted Cheryl would be released from prison after 15 years. In his view, the defendant had failed to show remorse for her crime, displaying arrogance and even contempt towards the court, and now had ample time to reflect on her heinous act. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Irene Cortez. Irene Cortez, née Lucas, was born in 1980 in Granada, Spain. She grew up in a well-off family with a brother and sister. Her parents ran a successful small business, which her mother, Maria Lucas, expanded and continued to operate after her father's early passing. Thanks to her mother's efforts and the help of her uncle, Pedro Lucas, Irene wanted for nothing. As the eldest of the three siblings, she was a beautiful, outgoing girl who loved being the center of attention and attracted boys from an early age. Shortly after finishing school, she married and became pregnant at 17, giving birth to her first child. 2 years later, she had her second child. Despite becoming a mother at a young age, Irene's family supported her in pursuing a good education. In the early 2000s, Irene relocated to the resort city of Malaga with her husband and their 2 children. There, she launched an entertainment venue that quickly gained popularity and became profitable. Initially, it was a small disco bar, but it eventually evolved into a full-fledged nightclub in Malaga. They welcomed their 3rd child, and life seemed prosperous and stable. However, tragedy struck when Irene's husband was arrested at the age of 25 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for trafficking illegal substances. Sadly, he lost his life in prison under mysterious circumstances. With her husband gone, Irene was left alone to care for their children. Drawing strength from her own mother, who had single-handedly raised 3 children, Irene was determined to persevere. Despite the challenges, she successfully managed her business, earning a good income, and had ambitious plans for the future. Ferd Saras, born in 1976 in Baronia, Colombia, grew up in a large, impoverished family as the youngest of his siblings. After his parents separated in the early 1990s, he stayed with his mother, while his older siblings became independent. In 2001, at the age of 25, Ferd and his elderly mother moved to Spain in search of a better life, settling in Malaga, where he took on any job to support them. In 2005, Ferd began working as a waiter at a nightclub owned by Irene. She quickly noticed his hard work and reliability, and was also drawn to him. Ferd, in turn, did his best to impress her. At the time, Irene's husband was in prison, and she intended to file for divorce once he was released, but he died unexpectedly before she could do so. Irene and Ferd's employer-employee relationship soon evolved into romance. Despite Irene having 3 children from previous relationships, and Ferd's humble background as a waiter who received a salary from her, their relationship blossomed. Within months of starting their relationship, they made the decision to cohabit. They moved into Irene's spacious apartment, and shortly after, Irene became pregnant with Ferd's child. They went on to have 2 children together. Although it is unclear whether they formally got married, Irene retained her first husband's surname, whereas the children she had with Ferd took on the Saras surname. Irene's past repeated itself in 2009 when her husband Ferd was arrested for distributing illegal substances and imprisoned. Just like her first husband, Ferd's imprisonment left Irene alone to care for their 5 children. Although he was sentenced to 3 years, Ferd served only 1.5 years due to good behavior and cooperation with the authorities. During Ferd's imprisonment, Irene found comfort in the arms of another man and lived with him for 1.5 years. However, upon his release, Ferd discovered Irene's infidelity and was understandably furious. He threatened Irene and her lover, even coming close to attacking the man, but narrowly avoided further legal trouble. Ultimately, the situation was resolved peacefully. Ferd chose to forgive Irene for the sake of their children, and they resumed their life together, as if the imprisonment and infidelity had never occurred. Irene's family members had always harbored doubts about Ferd. Her mother and uncle disapproved of their relationship, suspecting that Ferd was only interested in Irene's wealth. Additionally, Irene's older children from her previous marriage never accepted Ferd, whereas the youngest, whom Ferd had raised since the age of 2, saw him as a father figure. In early 2011, Irene's husband Ferd told her he needed to visit his homeland of Colombia because his father was severely ill. Ferd's estranged father had been diagnosed with advanced cancer, and his sister in Barranquilla had informed him of the situation. Irene, who had always wanted to visit Colombia, decided to accompany him. She was eager to meet Ferd's father, whom she had never met, and experience the famous Barranquilla Carnival, which usually takes place in late February. Irene, who hadn't taken a vacation in years due to her dedication to work and raising their 5 children, saw this trip as a much-needed break. They planned a 10-day trip, and Irene's mother and younger sister agreed to take care of her children during that time. Despite her mother Maria Lucas's attempts to dissuade her from the journey due to a bad premonition, Irene ignored her concerns. At the same time, the family faced financial difficulties due to a seasonal downturn in their business. Although Irene had €3,000 in cash saved at home, she discovered that the money had mysteriously disappeared on the eve of their trip, almost canceling their plans. Irene quickly borrowed the necessary funds from her uncle and close friends, booked their flight tickets, and reserved a hotel in the city center, thoroughly preparing for a journey that would tragically be her last. On February 27, 2011, Irene and her partner Ferd arrived in Colombia after an uneventful flight and checked into their hotel. Irene called her mother to reassure her that they had arrived safely. However, 2 days later, Ferd informed Irene's 14-year-old son that his mother had died. At first, Ferd claimed that Irene had died in an accident, but it soon emerged that she had been murdered during a robbery at a bar in the Baronia neighborhood. The case quickly gained widespread media attention in Colombia, with reports suggesting that Irene, a Spanish tourist, had been killed by robbers who had fled the scene, prompting a massive police manhunt. However, the circumstances of the robbery and murder seemed suspicious. The attackers did not appear to have stolen anything, instead shooting Irene in the heart before fleeing in haste. Despite witnessing the shooting, Ferd appeared calm during an interview with journalists, which did not match the image of a grieving widower. The Spanish embassy in Bogotá confirmed Irene's murder and announced that her remains would be repatriated after the necessary investigations. The exact events of the night of March 2nd remain unclear, and authorities are currently pursuing the attackers responsible for the senseless crime. Surveillance footage provided crucial clues in the mysterious death of Irene Cortez. The footage, captured by cameras at the scene of the crime, shed light on the events of March 1st. That evening, Irene and her partner Ferd Garris had made plans to meet Ferd's brother, his sister, and their spouses. The group of 6 friends spent the day at the carnival, took a stroll around town, and then headed to a local bar for dinner and entertainment, following Ferd's suggestion. By 1 a.m., Irene, Ferd, and his relatives were the only customers remaining at the bar. At around 2 a.m., 2 young men, who looked out of place, sat down away from the group. They didn't order anything and seemed uncomfortable, which caught the attention of the bar manager due to their suspicious behavior. Additionally, their youthful appearance prompted the manager to check if they were of legal age to be in the bar. When asked for their IDs, the young men refused to comply, and when told to leave, one of them pulled out a gun, aiming it at the manager. The other man produced a knife, but quickly moved out of the camera's view. The gunman pushed the manager aside and approached Irene's table, announcing that they were being robbed and demanding that they hand over their mobile phones and cash. The man with the knife reappeared, presumably to collect the valuables, while the gunman continued to threaten the group. However, he didn't get a chance to act. Faced with the gunman, Irene was ordered to stand up so that Ferd could be searched. As Irene reached for her purse, the assailant suddenly lunged at her with the hand holding the gun. A shot was fired, striking Irene directly in the chest, causing her to collapse to the floor. The assailants then fled the scene without taking any valuables. Ferd and his brother chased after the robbers, while his sister tried to stop Irene's bleeding, and his brother's wife called the emergency services. Unfortunately, the culprits escaped. The men returned to the bar, trying to aid Irene, but it was too late. The emergency responders arrived quickly, but Irene died on the way to the hospital, leaving behind a baffling case and a grieving family. A massive manhunt was launched to catch the perpetrators, followed by their arrest and trial for the robbery and murder that took Irene Cortez's life. With the city full of tourists for the carnival, law enforcement utilized all available resources to ensure their safety. The next day, the authorities apprehended the primary suspect, Brian Dario, who was identified as the gunman. Shortly after, Dario implicated his partner in crime, Juan Carlos. The 18-year-old Juan Carlos subsequently surrendered to the police, hoping to receive a more lenient sentence. During the interrogation, Dario claimed that financial difficulties, debts, and a sick child in need of expensive medical treatment drove him to commit the crime, a claim later supported by his relatives. He maintained that Irene's shooting was accidental, occurring when he tried to snatch her purse. Juan Carlos claimed he was an unknowing participant in the crime, saying that Brian had not shared his plans with him. According to Juan Carlos, Brian only asked him to provide backup in a job where he would carry a small knife purely for intimidation purposes, not to cause harm. He also claimed that once he realized Brian's true intentions, he left the scene. However, the surveillance footage told a different story, clearly showing Juan Carlos returning to Brian after he initially left. With both Juan Carlos and Brian in police custody and having confessed to the crime, it seemed like the case was closed, and they would soon be facing prison sentences. Dario was sentenced to 23 years in prison for robbery and homicide, while Carlos got 17 years. However, new evidence pointed to Ferd's involvement, including his wife's family accusing him of masterminding her murder. A private investigator found that Ferd had access to missing €3,000, which may have been used to pay Dario. Ferd also lied about his father's cancer to justify a trip to Colombia, and suspiciously suggested visiting the crime scene, staying late into the night. The detective conducted a thorough examination of the camera recordings, interpreting the footage and drawing his own conclusions. He observed that the criminal's behavior was unusual. Juan appeared frightened and seemed uncertain about what was happening, while Brian approached Ferd and lifted him up, but didn't directly threaten him with a gun. It seemed like he were acquainted and were acting in unison. Next, Ferd moved behind Irene, who was sitting at the table, in a peculiar manner. When she reached into her bag to retrieve her wallet, the gunman looked at Ferd as if waiting for a signal. It's unclear whether he received any kind of sign, as the victim and her husband moved out of camera view shortly after the shot. The man chased the killer, but in the expert's opinion, he deliberately allowed him to escape. However, this assertion can be disputed, as Brian was armed with a gun, and Ferd could reasonably have feared for his life. After the chosen one was declared dead, the man's behavior raised questions. Despite the tragedy, he appeared composed, giving interviews to reporters and discussing details of the event without showing visible signs of distress or grief. Another puzzling aspect was his decision to inform Irene's 14-year-old son of his mother's death, rather than contacting her mother, uncle, or other adult relatives. According to Maria Lucas, this choice was deliberate, intended to inflict pain on the teenager, as punishment for not respecting the stepfather's authority. Irene's uncle, Pedro Lucas, was the first to speak out in the press, sharing his suspicions and the investigation's findings. He believed that Ferd had planned the trip in advance, luring Irene into a trap. The stolen money was allegedly used to hire a killer, and Ferd intended to assume guardianship over the children and take control of his late wife's business. Ferd's mother came to her son's defense, insisting that he loved Irene and her children deeply and would never harm them. However, she inadvertently revealed a telling detail, mentioning that Irene's infidelity had offended Ferd's pride, suggesting a potential motive for the crime. A new development emerged concerning Garrus leaving Spain, allegedly using fake documents to do so. This was noteworthy because he was not allowed to leave the country at that time, having recently been released from prison on parole. Garrus denied this information, claiming he left Spain legally and that Irene acted as his guarantor. Irene's body was returned to her native Spain 12 days after the tragedy, and a closed casket funeral was held due to the decomposition of her remains. Hundreds attended the funeral, including family, friends, neighbors, and even those who didn't personally know Cortez, but wanted to express their condolences to the family. The only person absent from the farewell ceremony was Ferd, who feared returning from Colombia due to concerns about potential retribution. Ferd claimed that his late wife's relatives had repeatedly threatened him and his elderly mother. Before flying back to Spain, he intended to request protection from the authorities to ensure his safety. He sought a protective order to attend the funeral, but his request was denied, and Garrus decided not to take the risk. In response, Ferd filed a court complaint against his deceased wife's relatives, alleging they prevented him from returning home. However, Maria and Pedro Lucas denied his claims, stating they wanted him to return to Spain to face trial. New court proceedings focused on fresh claims against Ferd, questioning Dario and Carlos in a Colombian prison about their link to Garrus and prior planning. Brian denied this, saying the murder was an unplanned result of a botched robbery, and he never met Ferd before. Dario admitted that he was under the influence of alcohol and prohibited substances on the evening in question, which explained his poor recollection of the event's chronology. Carlos, on the other hand, maintained that his friend had not involved him in his plans, and that everything that happened in the bar had been as shocking to him as it was to those they attacked. Juan seemed to be telling the truth, but Brian's words about who made the fatal shot raised some doubts. It was puzzling that, despite not committing the robbery, Brian ended up in prison, yet his sick child still received the necessary expensive treatment. Brian claimed that kind-hearted people who learned about his motive had helped him. However, the Lucas family lawyers attempted to prove that the €3,000 stolen from Irene, which Ferd had paid for her murder, were spent on the treatment, but this version was never proven. Garrus decided to return to Spain only after obtaining a court order that guaranteed his safety. Several months had passed since the tragedy, and the media frenzy had subsided. Upon his return, Garrus claimed to have brought investigation materials that proved his innocence in his wife's murder. He cited his main reason for returning as a desire to care for the children he shared with Irene, who had been under the care of the deceased's relatives during his absence. 6 months after the incident, Ferd granted a major interview in which he shared a devastating update. He had lost almost everything that mattered. He was unemployed, his passport had been revoked, and as a result, he was stuck in the country with no way to leave. To make matters worse, his friends had abandoned him, and his late wife's mother and uncle had forbidden him from seeing his own children. Ferd repeatedly clashed with Maria and Pedro Lucas in court, alleging that they had threatened him. Meanwhile, they tried to prove that he was involved in Irene's murder. Despite their efforts, neither party could provide sufficient evidence to support their claims. In the end, the grandmother and uncle retained custody of the children, and Ferd was unable to inherit any of his late wife's assets. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of the Ortega family. Born in March 1986, Paula was the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figaro Alara School and later attended the Polytechnic University, where she developed a keen interest in the hospitality industry. After her studies, Paula actively contributed to the growth of her family's business, which specialized in party goods manufacturing. The Ortega Alcocer family was well-to-do and renowned in Sangolquí and neighboring Ecuadorian towns. Paula's dad built a successful party goods business in Ecuador, producing balloons, piñatas, and more. The family opened stores in Sangolquí and Quito, with each member contributing. Paula managed a store and started a party planning service which flourished, bringing joy to people and fulfilling her. Paula Ortega's personal life struggled despite her family's business success. Her first marriage to Carlos Pedro was unhappy due to his alcoholism, infidelity, and theft. After their daughter's birth, Carlos's behavior worsened, leading Paula to end the marriage. With family support and her passion for work, Paula regained a sense of normalcy and hope. A decade after her previous experiences, Paula met Christian Diego, a tall, dark-haired, and handsome man who was 4 years her junior. Despite having lost faith in finding a worthy partner, Paula was initially cautious around Christian, who was persistent in his pursuit of her. However, Christian soon won her over with his calm and reliable nature, forming a strong bond with Paula's daughter, which greatly impressed her. After 2 years of dating, Paula's heart finally warmed up to Christian, and they decided to tie the knot in a beautiful wedding ceremony. Christian took on a paternal role, embracing Paula's daughter as his own, and soon they welcomed another daughter, Maria, into their family. During their 5-year marriage, Christian fully integrated into Paula's father's company, taking on a key role in finding locations for new stores. This job frequently required him to travel, leaving Paula and their daughters at home. Coming from a humble working-class background, Christian had always harbored ambitions of owning a large business one day. Unfortunately, some individuals are skilled at hiding their dark side, and it's possible to live alongside ruthless criminals for years without ever suspecting a thing. But the truth always has a way of revealing itself, often in the most unexpected and explosive ways. Paula Ortega and her husband Christian seemed like the perfect couple to those around them, with a happy and successful relationship. But beneath the surface, things were not as they appeared. After Paula's father passed away in 2020 following a long illness, the family's business began to fall apart. Christian, driven by a desire for power and wealth, tried to take Paula's father's place, but his lack of business skills led to a string of failed deals. Frustrated, Christian started taking out his anger on his family, initially in secret, but soon openly abandoning them for a life of partying and recklessness. Without Paula's father to keep him in check, Christian's true nature began to emerge, marked by a string of affairs and heavy drinking. Paula was determined not to repeat the mistakes of her previous traumatic marriage, and she refused to tolerate Christian's abusive behavior. Their home had become a war zone, with Christian's true nature, an ambitious egoist who craved power and obedience, on full display. After a particularly vicious argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce, fearing Christian's reaction. However, when Christian discovered her plans, his behavior abruptly changed. Desperate to maintain his position in the family and avoid losing his comfortable lifestyle, he reformed his ways and appeared to transform for the better. He expressed remorse, claiming to be confused and overwhelmed, and professed his love and appreciation for his family. Paula, still hesitant to be alone again, was convinced by Christian's eloquence to give him another chance. Christian suggested a romantic dinner at home, and Paula agreed, sending their daughters to her parents' house to prepare for the evening. Despite her reservations, she was excited to recreate a happy family atmosphere. The evening at the Ortega home was filled with celebration and comfort. The living room was decorated with festive garlands, and the dining table was warmly lit by candles. Christian poured a bottle of dry white wine while Paula served a hot meal. The night seemed to be a genuine step towards reconciliation, until Christian suddenly made a shocking proposal that disrupted the peaceful atmosphere. Christian confessed to his wife a costly mistake in his bid to take over the family business, causing significant losses. The company now needed a new investor, which would mean giving up part of the firm. Paula refused to consider it, wanting her father's business to stay in the family. Despite his efforts, she wouldn't budge, leaving Christian frustrated and their relationship strained. On January 2, 2023, Paula took her daughter to the playroom before preparing for work at her shop. She had a large order to fulfill, involving balloon fountains and party decorations. During lunch, two slim men in dark hoodies arrived. Paula opened the door, expecting a courier. The men startled her, scanned the shop, and pinned her against the wall. Just as things got tense, a courier knocked on the door, prompting the men to flee. Paula handed over the package, her hands shaking with fear. She closed the shop, then called her mother, her voice trembling as she expressed her fear. Although her mother suggested reporting the incident to the police, Paula declined, attributing her reaction to mere fright, since nothing harmful had occurred. Instead of reopening her shop, Paula spent the day consumed by thoughts of Christian's actions and the identity and motives of the two mysterious men. Seeking comfort, she took a stroll through the city, stopping at a cafe for coffee and walking through the park to clear her head. Later, Paula visited her sister, and they had a heart-to-heart conversation over cups of tea, overwhelmed by the day's shocking events. Paula confided in her sister about the scary encounter at her shop, as well as her difficulties in her marriage. She shared how Christian had changed after her father's passing, indulging in alcohol and being openly unfaithful. Although she normally kept her personal struggles to herself, her emotions overpowered her pride and shame, allowing her to open up about the demeaning treatment she had been tolerating. Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, later recalled that Paula had spoken about her long-term life plans, including her dreams for her daughters to grow up and become professionals. Adriana also remembered that Paula had expressed her intention to continue running her business. According to Adriana, Paula was a selfless and extremely hard-working person. After her emotional talk with her sister, Paula headed home. However, Christian called her, saying he was picking up their daughter from the playroom and would stop by the shop to pick Paula up as well. Their conversation was brief, with kids' voices in the background. Paula didn't get a chance to tell Christian about the scary incident at her shop, especially since she suspected he might be involved. Reluctantly, Paula went back to work, putting her family's needs before her own. Christian arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had wanted to go home, and he couldn't resist her. He told Paula that the kids were at home, eagerly waiting for hamburgers, a modern family tradition. Instead of going to the nearest fast food joint, Christian took Paula to the Courtyard restaurant at a nearby shopping center. He parked the car by a secluded wall, locked it securely, and left Paula inside to collect their order. Relaxing in the passenger seat after a long and tiring day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the danger that was approaching. Shortly after, she recognized two familiar figures standing near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. She realized they were the same unexpected visitors who had come to her shop earlier. Paula tried to remain calm, trusting that the car was secure and that Christian would return soon. But suddenly, the car's lights flashed and the door locks disengaged. Panicked, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms, but she was trapped with no way to escape. One intruder casually got into the driver's seat, while the other joined him in the back, pinning Paula down even more. She felt something warm trickling down her arm before everything went dark. The attack left Paula with 11 knife wounds to her neck and 2 to her face. The assailants fled the scene, leaving Paula alone and gravely injured. Christian returned just 7 minutes later to a horrific sight. The car's interior was drenched in blood. Frantic, he called emergency services, but struggled to clearly communicate the situation and give the emergency coordinates. He then called Paula's mother to report the attack before driving to the hospital himself. Tragically, Paula succumbed to her injuries in the emergency room, passing away before receiving the necessary medical attention. Christian was overcome with grief and shock after losing his wife Paula, screaming and throwing chairs in the waiting room. The community was stunned, the family devastated, wondering who attacked Paula and why. Initially, the prosecution thought it was a robbery gone wrong, citing the stolen $600 and gold necklace. Security footage showed two men in hoodies visiting her store, but their faces were unclear. 2 months after Paula's death, her family sought justice, but the case stalled. However, Adriana, Paula's sister, revealed a crucial conversation with Paula, which cast doubt on Christian's innocence. She exposed Christian's infidelity and violence, and Paula's consideration of divorce, giving him a motive to kill. The prosecution then searched the couple's home, finding incriminating messages on Christian's phone and a document to transfer the company, which Paula refused to sign. After the incident, Christian was investigated for suspected homicide. New evidence revealed a complex web of deceit in the couple's relationship. 2 weeks later, it was discovered Christian had transferred $2,000 to an unknown woman's account, adding to suspicion. The most shocking aspect was Christian using Paula's account to make a payment while she was dying, instead of helping her. The woman who received the $2,000 transfer from Christian on January 2, 2005, was identified as 28-year-old Laura Castillo. She was questioned by the police and revealed that her bank card had gone missing a couple of days prior, but she hadn't thought much of it since her brother often used it. Despite denying any connection to Christian, Laura's solid alibi during the incident ruled her out as a suspect, and she was released. The case stalled again until Laura returned to police, saying her brother had given back her bank card. She described him, matching one of the surveillance camera images near the crime scene. One attacker had forgotten his hood, revealing Byron and Morton Castillo, repeat offenders with a long criminal record. They were arrested, leaving the question, what linked these criminals to respected family man Christian? Paula Ortega was a victim of a carjacking at a gas station on December 8, 2022. One man distracted her while his accomplice stole her car. Fortunately, her daughters weren't in the car. Surveillance footage identified the Castillo brothers, who targeted her before. Ironically, Paula had met them earlier that day. Christian's claim that thieves contacted him raised doubts about his innocence. He met them, recovering Paula's belongings, including her wallet. Experienced investigators were puzzled by Christian's boldness. Surveillance cameras identified the carjackers. Christian, under suspicion, created a new defense, claiming the brothers were extorting him. Police questioned suspects separately, telling them one had confessed. Martin Castillo buckled, admitting Christian paid him $2,000 to kill his wife, promising another $2,000 after. In a reenactment, Martin demonstrated how he inflicted 11 fatal stab wounds. He then calmly revealed the details of the arrangement. Martin also revealed that the theft of Paula's car and the attack on her shop were part of Christian's plan to put pressure on her. As it turned out, Paula lived a few hours longer than Christian had intended, on November 29, 2023. All three suspects appeared in court, where the prosecution presented a clear picture of the events surrounding the murder, pieced together from various sources. Forensic analysis of surveillance camera footage and audio recordings from the area where Christian had parked his car revealed a chilling and disturbing narrative. In a disturbing surveillance video, Christian Diego is seen getting out of his car and walking towards a shopping center elevator. Shortly after, he remotely unlocks his car from about half a block away, allowing two attackers to get in and assault Paula. The prosecutor's report highlights Christian's suspicious behavior after the attack, including repeatedly looking back, approaching the car, stopping, returning, pacing back and forth, and making phone calls. Remarkably, when he finds his wife bleeding heavily, he shows no shock or urgency to help her, instead driving her to a hospital that is far away. Christian's actions, meticulously recreated from surveillance footage, especially in the first 4 minutes after Paula's attack, are revealed to be cold and calculated as she remains alive but bleeding in the car. Standing nearby, Christian ruthlessly transfers money to his accomplices for their role in the assault. Paula's family lawyers are urging the court to consider these videos as factors that make the crime even more serious. The reconstructed sequence of events presented in court proves that the crime was planned in advance. Around 1:30 p.m., 2 individuals arrived at Paula's store, which happened to be near Christian's location. This suggests that the crime may have been planned to take place during the lunchtime closure when Paula was alone. However, prosecutor Marlon Calderon pointed out inconsistencies in the story, questioning how the assailants knew the couple would be at the store if they weren't following them, yet still managed to arrive on time to commit the crime. Christian's suspicious behavior, including not fully raising the car window, unlocking the doors near the store, pacing back and forth before helping his wife, making phone calls, and not seeking immediate medical attention at a nearby clinic, are key pieces of evidence that implicate him in orchestrating the murder. The trial of Christian and Paula Ortega exposed the dark truth of femicide, the intentional murder of women due to their gender. Despite Paula's professional success, Christian's youthful energy fueled his abuse and contempt towards her. Trapped in her own making, Paula enabled Christian's control until his sinister plot culminated in her tragic death. More than 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, provided testimonies that, along with a thorough examination of internal and external family communications, revealed Christian's real intentions and goals. Without having the legal right to sign documents, Christian tried to force Paula to transfer her company shares to him. However, he failed. Although Christian did not physically harm Paula, he subjected her to severe psychological abuse, which he cleverly disguised as a perfect family life, as stated in the Prosecutor General's report. Video evidence led to Christian being placed in preventive isolation for being the mastermind behind the crimes. This measure is not the same as being arrested, but rather a strategy to neutralize a threat to society. After this action, Christian planned to flee the country. In the high-profile case against Christian Diego, who was accused of planning his wife's death, his defense team worked hard to portray him as a victim. However, they were unable to refute key evidence, including surveillance footage and fake company transfer documents. Desperate to avoid conviction, the defense attempted to portray the accused as mentally unstable, citing incidents of sudden rage. However, multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian and deemed him competent to stand trial. As the situation grew dire, his defense counsel suggested he flee the country, asking if his passport was ready and proposing he buy a ticket to Panama for the next day. But this escape plan failed when Christian's search for Central American flight tickets alerted the authorities. The prosecutor swiftly detained Christian for 8 hours, then charged him and presented the case details to a judge specializing in domestic violence cases. Christian was held in preliminary detention pending trial, accused of being the mastermind behind a brutal act that left 2 young children orphaned and a family grieving the loss of their loved one. The Ortega family demanded justice for this heinous crime, emphasizing its devastating impact on the children and their loss. In a case that captivated public attention, the jury found Christian and his 2 accomplices guilty of a meticulously planned and intentional act of extreme brutality. The unremorseful trio was sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Ruminahui offer their condolences to the family and friends of Paula Alcácer, who tragically passed away. They extend their deepest sympathies to those affected by her loss, an esteemed businesswoman, friend, mother, and wife who made significant contributions to the canton's development and brought prosperity to those around her. Paula's case highlights the disturbing trend of violence against women, as reported by the Latin American Association for Alternative Developments, which revealed a staggering 332 fatalities in 2022 due to gender-based violence. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kristen Rossum. Kristen Rossum, a chemistry graduate student at San Diego State University, had the potential for a bright future. However, she is now serving a life sentence at a women's facility in Central California for crimes committed against her husband, Ralph, and Constance Rossum. Kristen is a mother of 3, and despite her efforts to prepare them for a successful future, her own life took a different turn. Her children were receiving a well-rounded education with regular schooling, tutors, and participation in extracurricular activities designed to develop their talents. However, Kristen, who was fragile and impulsive, struggled to maintain this pace. She began to skip classes and sought escape from her reality, initially finding comfort and forgetfulness in this avoidance. However, after consuming alcohol, the calming effect wore off, and Kristen became dependent on methamphetamine, the most addictive illegal substance in the United States. The drug induced clouds of paranoia, euphoria, and hallucinations, leading to Kristen's erratic behavior and detachment from reality, as well as a lack of parental attention. Kristen confessed to being addicted to substances since her high school days, which was devastating news for her family of college-educated professionals. After months of turmoil with her parents, the 17-year-old Kristen secretly left home and went on vacation to Mexico with her friends, where she met Gregory DeVette, a tall, handsome man, 7 years her senior. Gregory took on a paternal role, and Kristen landed a job at the local forensic department as a toxicology assistant, impressing her employers with her skills and momentarily forgetting her addiction. Her position in toxicology gave Kristen access to controlled substances, and she went on to graduate from college with honors. Her relationship with Gregory lasted about 5 years, culminating in a grand wedding on May 5, 1999. Kristen's parents adored Gregory and were convinced that their daughter had overcome her dependency and was headed towards a life of great promise and happiness. In March 2000, Kristen landed a job as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office, where she learned to analyze body fluids for controlled substances. However, she soon became disillusioned with her mundane life and sought thrills elsewhere. She found an opportunity with her new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had just been appointed head of the department. As their romance blossomed, Kristen's marriage to Gregory began to unravel, despite his efforts to save it. Aware of his wife's vulnerabilities, Gregory struggled to hold on, but Kristen had made up her mind. On Monday, May 6th, she asked for a divorce. On November, Kristen went to work as usual, but she was very tired and worried about her husband Greg, who was sick and stayed home. In the days following their difficult conversation, Kristen was uneasy, but Greg seemed calm and indifferent. Uncharacteristically, Kristen informed her workplace about her husband's illness and visited him during her lunch break. That same day, at 9:22 p.m., Greg was asleep, and Kristen called the emergency services to report that her husband was not breathing, fearing he might have taken his own life. Overwhelmed with emotion, Kristen cried on the phone and didn't follow the dispatcher's instructions to examine Greg's body and potentially administer first aid. The police and paramedics arrived at the scene at 10:19 p.m. and found Greg lying lifeless on the bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered rose petals, with an exposed stem nearby. A preliminary examination revealed that Greg had likely consumed a lethal dose of multiple controlled substances, with empty vials of strong painkillers scattered around the room. Torn wedding photos were also found in his bed. During the interrogation, Kristen stated that she had told Greg about their separation the previous night, a mere 17 months after their wedding. Kristen regretted marrying him, feeling she had rushed into it. She mentioned that Greg was too clingy and she wanted space. Greg's death was officially classified as a suicide, with the autopsy revealing that he had succumbed to a lethal dose of strong sedatives. Kristen gave her consent for the cremation to proceed, but Gregory's family and friends were adamant that he would never take his own life. None of them had noticed any unusual changes in his personality or mood that might have hinted at his supposed suicide. In fact, Greg was known to be strongly opposed to controlled substances and would never resort to using them. His relatives were so convinced of foul play that they intervened to stop the cremation, demanding an independent autopsy to uncover the truth. The family's persistence led investigators to consider a murder scenario soon after the incident. An autopsy revealed a significant amount of fentanyl, a painkiller 150 times stronger than morphine, as well as smaller amounts of clonazepam and traces of oxycodone. Investigators suspected that someone else might have administered the lethal dose of fentanyl to Gregory, given the strong influence of clonazepam and other drugs found in his system. Since fentanyl is not an over-the-counter drug, Kristen became the prime suspect due to her knowledge and access to these substances. She was subsequently questioned by the police. During the police questioning, Kristen's disheveled appearance and erratic behavior suggested she was struggling with drug dependence, which she confirmed in her testimony. On the day of Gregory's death, Kristen's account of events was inconsistent. She initially told paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later suggested he might have been taking oxycodone. At the hospital, Kristen told a nurse that Gregory might have overdosed on oxycodone. Like other opioids, oxycodone can not only relieve pain, but also produce feelings of euphoria. However, it can weaken the respiratory system, and if not treated promptly, its use can be fatal. During their conversation with Kristen, police considered the possibility that Gregory's death was an accidental overdose of cold medicine and oxycodone. They also learned that Gregory was distressed about their failed marriage, which led Kristen to claim that he had taken his own life. This sparked another investigation, which uncovered more details. On November 8th, Russ Lowe, a co-worker of Kristen's, contacted the police and informed them about Kristen's affair with her boss, Dr. Robertson. This new information shifted the direction of the police investigation. Investigators found evidence of Kristen's relationship with Dr. Robertson, including passionate emails and computer files. They also discovered Dr. Robertson's expertise in fentanyl through professional articles. The evidence pieced together to suggest that Gregory had become a threat to the lovers. As Kristen had access to labs and controlled substances, it was suspected that she was secretly using them, and Dr. Robertson was covering for her. Dr. Robertson told detectives that he was aware of his lover's drug addiction. Although no charges were filed against the couple at the time, they were both fired for violating several rules during the investigation. Serious trouble began for Kristen in January when police raided her house, finding drug traces and evidence of personal drug use. She was arrested but later released on bail. As the investigation progressed, new information emerged, including her diary, which was seized during the initial search. Apparently, Kristen tried to conceal her involvement and assert her innocence by creating the illusion that her husband Gregory's death was self-inflicted. On the day of his death, she bought a rose, revealing her internal motivations. The medical examination revealed that Gregory was unconscious for at least 6 hours before he died, and his death may have occurred an hour or an hour and a half before it was officially confirmed. Furthermore, bruises were found around the needle mark on his arm. A shortage of the drug that led to Gregory's death, as well as other controlled substances, were discovered at Kristen's workplace. Police believe Kristen poisoned Gregory with alcohol and fentanyl without his knowledge. Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After 6 months in detention, she was released on bail, and the first trial began soon after. The prosecution's main theory was that she killed Gregory because he threatened to damage her good girl reputation by revealing her repeated drug use and affair with Michael Robertson. The prosecution alleged that Kristen fatally poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a synthetic opiate that is 80 times more potent than morphine. According to them, Kristen initially attempted to kill Gregory using clonazepam, but after this attempt failed, she administered the fentanyl. The prosecution also contended that Kristen subsequently staged the scene in the bedroom to give the impression that Gregory had committed suicide by tearing out pages from her diary, scattering rose petals around his body, and positioning a wedding photo nearby. The court was told that Kristen, a biochemistry graduate, used her knowledge of drugs and chemistry to kill Gregory. Prosecutors alleged that Kristen tried to make her colleagues at the medical examiner's office believe Gregory's death was a suicide by withholding information about the fentanyl. However, before the autopsy could take place, Kristen was transferred to a different laboratory, and attempts to alter the toxicology report were unsuccessful. It was stated that on the morning of November 6th, Kristen phoned the owner of Gregory's apartment to report his absence, then went to work. Her colleagues testified that about an hour after arriving at the lab around 9 a.m., Kristen was seen crying in her manager Michael's office. The apartment building where Kristen and Gregory lived reported seeing Kristen return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she visited a local grocery store, buying several items, including a credit card statement with red roses, which confirmed she was still alive a few hours before Gregory's death. Kristen made several calls to Dr. Michael Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who performed Gregory's autopsy. Dr. Blackburn testified that Gregory had been dead for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. At the time of death, Gregory was in the early stages of bronchopneumonia, a condition that occurs when breathing secretions accumulate in the lungs due to unconsciousness or inadequate breathing. The doctor also noted that Gregory's bladder contained a substantial amount of urine, which would have caused significant discomfort if he were conscious. From this, Dr. Blackburn inferred that Gregory had experienced breathing difficulties for around 6 to 12 hours before his death. Dr. Blackburn testified that the amount of clonazepam in Gregory's blood was insufficient to cause an overdose and was not the cause of death. In contrast, Dr. Theodore Stanley, testifying for the prosecution, explained that fentanyl is a powerful and fast-acting painkiller with serious side effects, including the potential to lead to respiratory arrest. The speed at which fentanyl takes effect depends on how it is administered, with peak effects occurring approximately 16 hours after a transdermal patch is applied, 20 to 30 minutes after oral administration, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes of intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley noted that fentanyl is not usually given orally because the liver breaks down about 65% of it, leaving only 35% to enter the bloodstream. Both Dr. Blackburn and Dr. Stanley were unable to provide a clear explanation for how fentanyl entered Gregory's system. However, Dr. Stanley suggested that the varying concentrations of fentanyl in Gregory's body, combined with evidence that he was unconscious and breathing shallowly in the hours leading up to his death, indicate that fentanyl may have been administered to him. Although the prosecutor could not definitively explain how Kristen poisoned Gregory, the evidence suggested that she might have applied a fentanyl patch to his arm while he was sleeping. The fact that 15 patches went missing from the lab where Kristen previously worked supports this possibility. The defense claims Kristen is innocent, acknowledging that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but arguing that he intentionally took it to end his life due to desperation stemming from family problems. In court, Kristen testified that on November 6th, she woke up to find Gregory in distress. At 7:42 a.m., she called his employer to report his illness and absence from work. Kristen told the court she went to her job but returned home to check on Gregory, asking why he was so upset. Gregory told her he felt unwell, having taken oxycodone and clonazepam, and planned to stay home and sleep. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor questioned Kristen's explanation, pointing out its strangeness. Kristen admitted to previously lying and hiding Gregory's drug use. The prosecutor suggested to the court that fentanyl was the ideal poison due to its difficulty in detection, knowledge Kristen likely acquired from her job. According to autopsy and toxicology results, Gregory was unconscious for around 6 to 8 hours, contradicting Kristen's claim of having lunch with him that day. The defense argued that Dr. Blackbourne's finding of non-fatal blood levels of clonazepam was irrelevant because the combination of oxycodone, an opiate, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, can create a synergistic effect, making them more potent together. They suggested that Gregory may have unintentionally taken the drugs himself and questioned why the high levels of these substances in his system remained unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree murder and murder under special circumstances by poisoning. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Despite maintaining her innocence and pleading no contest, Kristen's appeal was unsuccessful due to a mistake by her own defense team. They acknowledged that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites, which could have determined whether Gregory ingested fentanyl or if the fentanyl found in the samples resulted from laboratory contamination after his death. The appeals court was told that there was a problem with the handling of the autopsy samples, which could have affected their integrity. Specifically, the samples were stored in an unsealed cardboard box, with each container labeled as coming from Gregory's body. The box was left at the medical examiner's office for about 36 hours before being sent to the forensic laboratory, which raised concerns that someone with access to the office could have tampered with the samples during that time. Kristen's appeal argued that on November 8, 2000, Michael had informed a toxicologist that he had tested a sample of Gregory's stomach contents for fentanyl breakdown products. However, this information was not included in the original autopsy report. The Court of Appeal ruled that Kristen's lawyers should have objected to the prosecution's claim that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose and should have tested the autopsy samples for substances that break down into fentanyl, instead of just accepting that as the cause of death. Although the conviction was not overturned, the case was sent back to the federal court to determine whether this mistake by the defense could have changed the trial's outcome. U.S. Supreme Court ruled federal courts must respect state court decisions, denying Kristen's appeal and keeping her in custody. Her trial named Michael Robertson, Kristen Rossum's former boss and lover, as co-defendant. Though he's lived freely in Australia since 2000, he could be arrested and bailed for $100,000 if he returns to the US. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ellie Costile. Alexandria Coastal, known as Ellie, was born on September 11, 1997 in St. Louis. As a blonde-haired girl, she grew up with the care and love of her parents, Cindy and Keith, who supported her endeavors. Ellie excelled academically and in sports like track and field and golf. Her dream was to attend the University of Mississippi, and she became a student there, living in a dormitory in Oxford and being popular among her peers. Friends and relatives described her as a lively and energetic person. Summer on campus is quiet, with few students remaining. Those who stay attend extra lectures or prepare for next year, then unwind at local bars and nightclubs in the evening. Ellie Costile, an upperclassman, stayed to improve her knowledge, and having just passed a key exam, was planning to celebrate with friends. A popular spot among young people in Oxford Square is a small bar that serves pizza and drinks. Its lively atmosphere, complete with dim lighting, loud music, and a colorful selection of drinks, makes it a place where the bartenders know many customers by name. On the evening of July 19th, Ellie met up with friends at this bar, where they chatted and had a good time. Despite her efforts to have fun, Ellie seemed tense and spent most of the evening texting someone on her phone. After having a couple of cocktails, she discreetly left the bar. This would be one of the last times Ellie Costile, a University of Mississippi student, was seen in public. On July 20th, 2019, around 10:30 a.m., police officers stumbled upon a young woman's body near an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, about 30 miles from the university, during their routine patrol. The victim had been shot 9 times in the back, and investigators found 11 shell casings at the scene. A purse containing a driver's license and a student ID belonging to 21-year-old Alexandria Costal, a University of Mississippi student, was found nearby on the roadside. Ellie's death shocked the University of Mississippi community. Her father confirmed the news on Facebook, saying police told them Saturday that she'd been a crime victim. Witness interviews established that a few days before the incident, Ellie's parents had visited her from St. Louis, during which she expressed her enthusiasm for the upcoming academic year at the university, with no reservations about staying on campus for the summer. Moreover, data from her Apple Watch revealed that following a phone conversation with her mother, Ellie sent several messages to Brandon. An examination of these messages revealed that 3 months prior to the incident, Ellie had confided in Brandon about some shocking news. Since Brandon was the last known person to have communicated with the victim, he became a person of interest to the police. A closer look at their messages further disclosed that Ellie and Brandon had been in an on-again, off-again romantic relationship. Brandon Theld, a tall, dark-haired young man with an athletic build, was also a student at the University of Mississippi, hailing from Fort Worth, Texas, and raised in a well-mannered family. In 2016, when Ellie met Brandon as a freshman, she fell for him immediately. The young couple started dating, but they never formally declared themselves as an official couple. While Ellie's feelings for Brandon were genuine, he never showed a serious commitment towards her. Ellie's friends knew that her relationship with Brandon was troubled. They frequently argued, even in public. The couple would often break up, only to get back together after a while. On April 12, 2019, Ellie told Brandon that she was pregnant, but he didn't respond. She sent him numerous texts and voice messages, but he ignored her. 3 months later, Brandon finally replied, saying that he didn't want a child because it would ruin his life. He refused to help or support Ellie, telling her to just take a pill or make a doctor's appointment to deal with the situation. Despite being deeply in love, Ellie desperately wanted to talk to Brandon in person, but he kept refusing. On the night of July 19th, Ellie went to a local bar with her friends at 11:52 p.m. Surveillance cameras showed her leaving the bar and taking a taxi home. About 30 minutes later, Brandon called her at 1:58 a.m. on July 20th. Ellie got into a vehicle, unaware that it would be her last ride. She headed to an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, where Brandon was waiting. The drive to the camp was supposed to take around 45 minutes. Witnesses reported hearing gunshots in that area between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. On Sunday afternoon, investigators contacted Brandon Theld, requesting him to visit the police station to discuss Ellie Costio. Initially, he made excuses to avoid the meeting, but eventually promised to appear on Monday at 8:30 a.m. However, when Brandon failed to show up at the police station on Monday, July 22, 2019, investigators began tracking his phone's location. The data revealed that he was heading back to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. As a result, authorities issued an alert for his pickup truck. 2 days later, Brandon was finally arrested when he stopped at a gas station in Memphis. Brandon Theld, a 22-year-old, was arrested and charged with homicide in the local area. Despite this, his lawyer and father insisted that he was innocent. As the Oxford community tried to make sense of the violent death of one of their own, the death of Ellie Costio quickly drew national attention. Reporters from all over the country came to Oxford, eager to learn more about Ellie and the person accused of killing her. Brandon Theld maintained his innocence until the end, but the evidence was against him. A gun matching the shooting was found in his possession, along with bloody clothing. He had gone to Texas to get his father's gun, suggesting premeditation. His internet history showed searches for abortion services and ways to avoid punishment for a crime. A letter to his parents revealed his dark thoughts and feelings, where he mentioned that something in him just didn't work, and that he thought it was the end for him. Investigator Jared Bundren shared some previously known details about the shocking crime with the public. He revealed that Ellie had told Brandon she suspected she was pregnant, but Brandon didn't want her to have the baby. This led to numerous arguments between the couple, with Ellie wanting to meet in person to discuss the situation. Brandon refused to meet until the day of the incident. The police wanted to question Brandon and asked him to come to the station for questioning. However, Brandon resisted and made excuses for not being able to come in. Concerned, the police began tracking his cell phone and located him. They found that Brandon was heading to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Authorities alerted nearby police departments, and Brandon was arrested when he stopped to refuel at a gas station in Memphis. Upon his arrest, the police found blood on him and a pistol in his truck that matched the weapon used in Ellie's murder. Despite Brandon's claims of innocence, the police charged him with the crime. Morgan acted quickly after hearing about the student's death, seeking guidance from administrators. She noted the university's past experiences with student suicides and accidents, but this was a new situation. Morgan briefly addressed Ellie's passing in class, alerted counselors, and allowed students to postpone exams if needed. She expressed sympathy, saying her heart went out to Ellie's parents and friends, stressing that parents shouldn't have to bury their children. As it turned out, Ellie Kotile, in her need for support, had told friends that she was pregnant with Brandon Thell's child. Her sisters knew she was pregnant and that she had told Brandon. A classmate said that he was very upset about it, worrying about how it would ruin his life and future. He was angry that she wouldn't have an abortion, but she said she didn't believe in that. Ellie tried to end her 17-week pregnancy using harmful methods like excessive drinking and substance use. Brandon knew but was seeing someone else. He wanted her to abortion, but she morally opposed it. He was abusive, frequently breaking up with her in anger, then returning apologetic and she'd take him back. Ellie Kotile's shocked friends and classmates struggled to cope with the news and paid tribute to their friend on social media. Her friend Anna Pasco mentioned that it was just hard for her because when she saw Ellie's face, all she could think about was what Ellie went through, what she thought, and what she said. Anna added that it was very, very difficult. On Thursday evening in her hometown of St. Louis, a memorial service was held for Ellie Kotile at the request of the community. However, no public statements were made in Oxford about memorial events. Only black ribbons encircling the majestic white column of the women's houses, including Alpha where Ellie lived, served as a reminder of the tragedy. The young student's demise unsettled the entire state. Despite withholding key facts for investigative purposes, several news agencies conducted in-depth investigations and uncovered surveillance footage of Ellie Costial near the location where her body was discovered early Saturday morning. The footage, captured on cameras, shows Costial with a man at a 24-hour store in the Harmontown area. A store's owner revealed that police visited his store on Sunday to review the surveillance footage. However, he claimed that the investigators didn't explain the reason for their visit and took some evidence with them when they left. According to him, the video footage is erased every 72 hours, making it impossible to retrieve the captured footage. The business owner expressed his shock, saying, "We've never had any problems or violent incidents here. This is a small town, it's quiet, everyone knows each other. This is just madness." Lafayette County Sheriff's Office keeps investigation details quiet to ensure the perpetrator is brought to justice, says Coroner Rocky Kennedy, who explains that revealing too much now could jeopardize the case. Kennedy shrugged off intense media scrutiny, saying every case is equally important and gets the same level of attention. Michelle Miller stressed the need to recognize relationship warning signs after Ellie's death, questioning if it could have been prevented. Brandon Theld was charged and sentenced to life, with parole possible at 65, now serving at the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Brandon Theld showed remorse at his trial, apologizing to Ellie Costial's family and his own for her death. A key piece of evidence was that Ellie was never pregnant, leaving us to wonder why she fabricated it. She seemed to believe the lie, hoping it would win Brandon's heart. Tragically, her loved ones still grieve. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kendra Hatcher. Kendra Hatcher was born on February 3, 1980, in Springfield, Sangamon County, Illinois, to Reagan Hatcher and Bonnie Gibson Jameson Colley. Her parents divorced, and her mother later married Bruce Jimon. She had three sisters, Jamie Coleman Ashel Lepum, Melissa Jameson, and a brother, Neil Hatcher. Kendra grew up in Pleasant Plains, where she studied dentistry. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to Dallas and started working at Smile Zone, a dental studio. As a devout Christian, Kendra wanted to use her dental skills to help others, providing free services to disadvantaged children at the clinic. In her spare time, Kendra was involved in various activities, including teaching Bible studies and participating in volunteer programs. These programs involved building churches abroad and providing free dental services to children in Ecuador. After moving to Dallas, Kendra's professional career took off rapidly. Her personal life also began to blossom when she met Dr. Ricardo Palacios through a dating app on May 24, 2015. Kendra and Ricardo shared similar values, interests, and life goals. Ricardo was completing his dermatology residency at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. Despite having only been together for a few months, they were already discussing their upcoming marriage. A tragic incident in a parking lot took the life of Kendra, cutting short all their future plans. Upon arriving at the crime scene, investigators examined the evidence and initially suspected robbery as the motive, given that Kendra's purse and some valuables were missing. They found bullet fragments and a gun magazine near her body. However, the circumstances of the shooting and the bullet wounds suggested that robbery was not the primary motive. One bullet struck Kendra in the back, while the other hit her in the head. The entry wound was at the top of her head, and the bullet exited through her chin, indicating that she had her hands up and behind her head when she was shot. The murder theory was later confirmed when investigators obtained CCTV footage and reconstructed the events. The footage showed a black Jeep Grand Cherokee entering the parking lot at 7:15 p.m. 30 minutes later, Kendra returned home and parked in the same garage. Shortly after, a man approached her, shot her, and then ran to the side before jumping into the Jeep and driving off. Although the video quality was poor and the crime scene was not clearly visible, the authorities were unable to identify the assailant. However, they put the vehicle on a wanted list and appealed to the public for assistance. A man named Ortiz contacted the police after recognizing his car and footage related to the shooting. Ortiz claimed that, although the car belonged to him, he was not involved in the shooting and was not driving it at the time. He explained that, on the morning of September 2nd, he had lent his Jeep to two of his girlfriends, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, who asked to borrow it until the evening. Later that evening, Brenda called Ortiz to meet her at a restaurant where they were at the time of the crime. Meanwhile, Crystal Cortez drove the Jeep back to Ortiz's house. When Ortiz saw his Jeep on the TV news, he confronted Brenda, who initially denied that it was his Jeep, then admitted that Crystal had used it without his knowledge. Brenda tried to persuade Ortiz not to report the incident, offering to pay to have the Jeep repainted. At first, Ortiz was hesitant to get involved with the police, fearing it might jeopardize his pending U.S. citizenship. However, he eventually decided to cooperate and provided the police with the names of Brenda and Crystal. The police then tracked the movements of the Jeep on the day of the crime and located the two women. Brenda Delgado was the first to be questioned, but she claimed to have no knowledge of Kendra Hatcher and provided an alibi, stating she was at a restaurant with Ortiz at the time of the crime and produced receipts as proof. However, as the investigation continued, the truth slowly emerged, revealing the attempts by the perpetrators to conceal their involvement. Brenda Delgado came from a modest family. Her parents, Luis and Maria, immigrated to Dallas from Mexico, where her father worked in a factory. Brenda excelled academically and dreamed of attending medical school, but her parents couldn't afford the tuition. After high school, she continued to live with her parents, working as a dental assistant and at a spa, while still aspiring to a more affluent and beautiful life. Brenda balanced her dental assistant job with spa work, where she whitened her teeth. In 2012, she fell for Ricardo at a Jennifer Lopez concert. 3 months later, she moved in with him. Ricardo was smitten, meeting her parents, and Brenda gushed about her love in a Facebook birthday post. Brenda discovered she was pregnant, but Ricardo convinced her to have an abortion, leaving her devastated. After recovering from the ordeal, Brenda focused on her career and her beloved Ricky. She enrolled in Stanford that fall. Although it seemed like Brenda had moved on from the breakup, she was still hurting. Her obsession with Ricardo intensified, and when Ricky posted a photo with his new girlfriend, Kendra, a model-like beauty, Brenda was consumed by dark thoughts. Those close to her claimed she fantasized about harming Kendra. Investigators suspected Brenda had a strong motive to harm her rival. Ricardo confirmed that Brenda Delgado was his ex-girlfriend, and they had an on-again, off-again relationship from 2012 to 2015. They broke up a few months before Ricky met Kendra. Despite this, Ricardo believed he and Brenda remained friends and didn't think there was any bad blood between Brenda and Kendra. The reconstructed events revealed a disturbing picture of how manipulative and ruthless an abused woman can be. Brenda Delgado concocted a sinister plan to win back her former lover, Ricardo, and eliminate Kendra Hatcher, the woman he had moved on to. Initially, Brenda posed as Ricardo's supportive friend, pretending to take an interest in his relationship with Kendra. Unbeknownst to Ricardo, she gathered information about their future plans, which he naively believed was genuine concern. After Kendra's death, Ricardo confided in Brenda via text message, pouring out his grief. Brenda feigned sympathy, offering to help him in any way possible. Unaware of her true intentions, Ricardo trusted her completely. What he didn't know was that Brenda had been secretly manipulating him for months. She had been snooping on his mail, learning about his plans with Kendra, including their travel arrangements. This discovery fueled her anger, and she became fixated on eliminating Kendra, whom she believed had usurped her place in Ricardo's life. Brenda took control of Ricardo's phone account and used it to stalk him, keeping close tabs on his activities and those of his girlfriend Kendra. This obsession soon became her sole purpose in life. Brenda's fixation on stalking eventually led her to quit her job and dedicate all her time to achieving her twisted goals. Over time, she devised a cruel and terrifying plan to murder Kendra and take her place beside Ricardo. To put her plan into action, Brenda approached several acquaintances with an offer to harm Kendra in exchange for money. She eventually found a 21-year-old single mother, Crystal Cortez, who was struggling financially and willing to assist her. Crystal recruited a perpetrator, Christopher Love, who agreed to commit the crime. Brenda paid Crystal $500 and provided her with illegal substances, which Crystal then passed on to Christopher. Several women were tasked with following Kendra to learn her daily routines and identify the best location and time to carry out the crime. On September 2nd, 2015, they borrowed Jose's car. Crystal and Christopher lay in wait for Kendra in the parking lot, but lost their nerve and didn't follow her home from work due to fear of getting stuck in traffic. Later that evening, they finally carried out their sinister plan and were rewarded for their efforts. A few days after the crime, Crystal Cortez and Christopher Love were arrested. They both denied any involvement in the crime and claimed they were not at the scene. However, when the police found the murder weapon in the car, Love's story fell apart. Meanwhile, Crystal's alibi was inconsistent and confusing. At first, she claimed she was driving in the parking lot because an armed carjacker had taken over her SUV and forced her there. She even falsely stated that her young son was with her, but surveillance cameras showed no evidence of a child. As the investigation continued and more evidence emerged, Crystal changed her story again, this time offering to cooperate with the police in exchange for a reduced sentence. She implicated Brenda, claiming that she was the mastermind behind the crime and that they had been planning it for 2 weeks. According to Crystal, Brenda's obsession with winning back her ex-boyfriend, Ricardo, drove her to despise Kendra, whom she believed had taken her place. Brenda had pretended to be happy for Ricardo, but her life was actually unraveling. According to Crystal, Brenda decided to get rid of Kendra Hatcher at this point. In Crystal's testimony, she detailed how Brenda devised a plan to kill Kendra, enlisting her support. Brenda and Crystal started formulating a plan to kill Kendra, meeting several times and developing multiple plans. Initially, they planned to inject Kendra with illegal substances or sedatives and then dispose of her body. However, to avoid suspicion, Brenda needed a reliable enforcer and began looking for one. They drove around rough neighborhoods, asking people if they could help, which led them to Christopher Love, who agreed to help and participated in deciding the method of the crime. The three of them decided that shooting Kendra would be the quickest way to kill her. Crystal cooperated with authorities, revealing September 2nd wasn't a random choice. Brenda knew Kendra and Ricardo were going to Mexico, so they decided to kill Kendra before their trip. They wanted it to look like a botched robbery. Brenda and Crystal tracked Kendra's movements for days, noting her activities minute by minute. They traced her route home and entered the apartment complex's parking garage on September 1st, 2015, to set up the crime. Brenda and Crystal made a final check on the day of the crime. They picked up the Jeep and Christopher, dropping Brenda at the library to establish an alibi. Crystal and Christopher waited near Kendra's apartment, then followed her, losing her in traffic. They waited at her house, and when she arrived, Christopher shot her. Crystal claimed she didn't see it but heard the shot. She drove Christopher home, picked up her son, and returned the Jeep to Jose. Brenda's plan had finally come to fruition. She had eliminated her rival, and all she had to do was wait for a message from her beloved Ricardo. Brenda was thrilled to have committed the perfect crime. However, Crystal's subsequent confession and testimony against Brenda left no doubt about her guilt, and a warrant for her arrest was promptly issued. When the police arrived with the warrant, Brenda was no longer at home, having fled to Mexico using her dual citizenship. Brenda's involvement in a contract killing came to light after she fled, and on April 6, 2016, she was placed on the FBI's wanted list. With a $100,000 reward offered for information about her, she became the 9th woman to ever be listed among the most wanted fugitives, and the only woman on the list at the time. However, her freedom was short-lived, as she was apprehended just 2 days later in Torreon, Coahuila, by Mexican authorities, who extradited her to the United States on October 6, but only on the condition that she would not face the death penalty. Brenda was charged with capital murder in the U.S. At her 2017 Texas trial, relatives of Kendra and Ricardo spoke out. Witnesses testified, confirming Brenda's intentions and obsession with her ex. Her cousin Moses revealed Brenda's depression and her attempt to hire him to hurt Kendra. Brenda was obsessed with Ricardo, said friend Jennifer Escobar. Brenda read Ricardo's emails, tracked his movements, and had his house key and bank access. She asked Jennifer to kill or disable Kendra Hatcher, offering $2,000, a car, and drugs. Jennifer refused after consulting her parents. In court, multiple people who knew Brenda testified about her obsession, and it was established that Brenda had a motive to want Kendra dead. She viewed Kendra as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, specifically reuniting with Ricky. In the months leading up to Kendra's death, Brenda's obsession grew increasingly intense, as corroborated by evidence presented in court. This evidence included an ATM withdrawal receipt for $500, which Brenda later gave to Crystal as payment for her role, as well as a $600 cash payment received by Christopher Love. Furthermore, cell phone records revealed that Brenda, Crystal, and Christopher were together before the crime, with over 99 calls exchanged between Brenda and Crystal between August 22nd and September 4th, demonstrating their frequent communication to discuss the plan to kill Kendra Hatcher. Despite an alibi and receipts showing she was at a restaurant, the jury quickly found her guilty of Kendra Hatcher's murder. Delgado was sentenced to life without parole. Crystal Cortez, who cooperated with the investigation and pleaded guilty, received a 35-year prison sentence with parole eligibility. The Hatcher family expressed satisfaction with the court's decision and quietly left the courtroom following the verdict. On the other hand, the Delgado family, who knew Brenda as a loving daughter and woman with strong Christian values, refused to believe she was involved until the end. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne Baldelli was born on June 30th, 1969, in a small town in Southern California. She was the youngest of 3 children born to Marjorie and James Fold, with 2 older siblings, Michael and Michelle. Yvonne was especially close to her sister Michelle from a young age. Tragedy struck when Yvonne was 13, with the loss of her mother after a long illness. Her father James remarried a year later to Lillian, who turned out to be a kind and caring stepmother. Yvonne and her siblings developed a wonderful relationship with Lillian, who treated them as her own. Yvonne pursued a good education and experimented with various career paths, but her true passion lay in fashion design. She dreamed of turning her hobby into a successful business. However, her personal life was marked by misfortune. She had 2 failed marriages, the last one ending in divorce from Kevin Baldelli in 2007. Adding to her woes, Yvonne underwent surgery in her youth, which was followed by complications that left her unable to have children. After her second divorce, Yvonne lived a solitary life in her small apartment, where her only constant companion was her beloved dog, whom she lovingly referred to as her child. Despite her challenges, Yvonne remained close to her family, calling her father and sister daily and making it a point to visit them at least once a month. In 2009, as Yvonne was approaching her 40th birthday, she met Brian Brimager, a married Marine with a young son. Despite being committed, Brian was open to an extramarital affair and confided in Yvonne about his unhappy marriage, stating that his only reason for not filing for divorce was the welfare of his child. Yvonne was taken by Brian's fit appearance and believed him. Having had a loveless marriage, she knew it was tough to leave, especially with kids. She didn't pressure him, thinking his child was the main issue. Little did she know, Brian was a charming liar, using his looks to juggle multiple relationships and fake promises. It became clear that Brimager, who was married, was having an affair with not 1, but 2 women. One of them was Yvonne, and the other was Christine Verhoeven, a beautiful blonde with many influential contacts. Christine worked as an analyst at the White House. When Yvonne found out that her lover, Brian, was cheating on his wife with another woman, she decided to take action. Gathering her courage, she called Brian's wife to inform her that her husband was having an affair, not only with her, but also with another woman. This shocking news sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult decision. In the end, he chose Yvonne, although it's possible that she influenced his decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with Yvonne. At the time, he was still serving in the Marines, but he had been thinking about ending his military career for a while. They seemed genuinely happy, but Yvonne's family remained skeptical of her new partner, questioning the sincerity of his feelings for her. In the summer of 2011, Brian started talking about making drastic changes to his life, including leaving the Marines, moving away from the city, and settling down on a tropical island. Yvonne shared his vision, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever he chose to go. She believed she had found the love of her life and adored him. By September, Yvonne decided to move to Panama's Carino Island, a tropical haven. Her dream was to open a boutique, creating custom outfits for tourists. In early September, Yvonne, Brian, and her dog flew to Panama, then took a ferry to Carino Island, renting an oceanfront house. The island's hot and humid climate attracted tourists, especially divers and surfers, year-round. Brian, a skilled guitar player since his teenage years, brought his instrument to the island with the intention of launching a music career, performing at various entertainment venues. Soon after settling in, he established connections with several local bar owners, and one of them offered him a gig. He would play in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, and as a token of appreciation, the audience would often buy him drinks, leading to a habit of heavy daily drinking. Yvonne's business, on the other hand, struggled to take off, with sluggish sales and meager profits. However, she persevered and found work at one of the bars. She also adopted a second dog, which she found on the island, and decided to keep. She maintained daily contact with her sister Michelle Valenzuela, sharing every detail, but her messages became increasingly brief and somber, causing concern among her family. Initially, the island seemed like a paradise to they. Yvonne had hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic beach wedding. However, as time passed, Brian showed no signs of rushing into marriage. Their relationship quickly began to deteriorate. In early December, Michelle became concerned when she stopped receiving messages from her sister Yvonne. Then, on December 14, 2011, Michelle received an unexpected call from Yvonne's boyfriend Brian. He asked when he could come by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in Michelle's garage before he and Yvonne had traveled to Panama. This call surprised Michelle because it meant Brian had returned to the US. But where was Yvonne? Why hadn't she come back or even reached out? Brian told Michelle that he had explained everything in an email he had sent a few days earlier. He also claimed that Yvonne had sent Michelle a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing. So, she turned to her email and discovered two unread messages, one from her sister Yvonne and one from Brian. Brian claimed in his message that Yvonne had left him for a new lover and moved to Costa Rica. However, a message supposedly from Yvonne stated that she had left him after discovering his infidelity, and that another woman, Christine Verhoeven, had given birth to his child. This message also claimed that Yvonne had met someone new and gone to Costa Rica with him. It seemed believable at first, especially since Yvonne was unable to have children, and news of her partner's infidelity could have been devastating. However, Yvonne was not one to act impulsively, and it was unusual that she hadn't contacted her sister to discuss her situation. The tone of the message from Yvonne also raised suspicions, as it didn't sound like her previous communications. Michelle suggested filing a missing persons report for Yvonne, but Brian was hesitant, claiming she was fine and capable of taking care of herself. He insisted she would come home on her own, but his nervousness and quick departure after picking up his vehicle raised suspicions. Shortly after, a message from Yvonne's phone arrived, stating she would return home in January for their father's birthday. This brought Michelle some relief, and she decided to wait, hoping Yvonne would come back as planned. By mid-January, Yvonne remained missing and hadn't reached out. Meanwhile, Michelle was stunned to learn that Brian had unexpectedly married Christine Verhoeven shortly before the new year began. What made this even more surprising was that he had only parted ways with his previous girlfriend a few weeks earlier. Michelle's concern for her sister's safety prompted her to report Yvonne missing to the police, as she suspected Yvonne hadn't actually gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry to Panama confirmed her fears, verifying that Yvonne Baldelli had not left the country. Michelle's cousin, a programmer, helped trace the IP address of the emails supposedly sent by Yvonne from Costa Rica in December. The investigation revealed that the emails were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. As the situation grew increasingly alarming, Michelle quickly informed the police of her discovery. Valenzuela then reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and continued to send messages from her phone and email, impersonating her for about a month. Although there wasn't enough concrete evidence to arrest Brian at the time, law enforcement interviewed him and continued gathering proof of his guilt. It was discovered that Brian had asked Christine to marry him while he was still in Panama with Yvonne, promising they would soon return and raise their daughter together. However, Christine was not aware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on a business trip. 2 months after Yvonne's disappearance, her sister and niece conducted their own investigation and flew to Panama, where they sought the help of Don Winter, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator who specialized in finding missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Yvonne's disappearance and the version of events Brian had given. After listening to them, Winter immediately expressed his concern that the chances of Yvonne being alive were low. With his extensive experience in such investigations and using his connections, Winter decided to pressure the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning Yvonne's disappearance into international news. A press conference was also organized, which included Yvonne's family members. After arriving in Panama, Yvonne's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends joined the search for Brian Baldelli and assisted in the investigation. Together, they thoroughly searched the tropical island of Carino, but found no trace of him. The dense undergrowth and swampy marshes, which were home to a wide variety of wildlife, hindered their search efforts. The family also questioned the island's residents about their knowledge of Brian and Yvonne and what they could reveal about the couple's behavior. It became clear that Brian and Yvonne had been drinking excessively and frequently got into loud public arguments, disregarding those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars, drinking and arguing. Moreover, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Yvonne's face and body, and she rarely removed her sunglasses, seemingly to conceal the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house they rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residents. Meanwhile, FBI agents brought in a specialized team of divers to search the waters surrounding the island for potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches also yielded no results. From the start, Brian was the main suspect in the case, but there was no solid evidence to charge him with. He repeatedly denied any involvement, sticking to the same story that his ex-partner Yvonne had run off with another man. It wasn't until September 21, 2012, that Brian was finally questioned by the police and a search of his home was conducted. At that time, his wife Christine was at work and Brian was unemployed, staying at home to take care of their child and enjoying his favorite hobby, playing golf. Brian claimed Yvonne left him after discovering his child with another woman, but became anxious when police found Yvonne's laptop on his table. The laptop had messages sent after she supposedly left, including a photo of Yvonne with a bruise and a conversation between Brian and his mistress about their secret affair. The search history showed queries about cleaning blood stains and removing blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, as neither Aon's body nor a mattress with blood stains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Aon didn't definitively prove his guilt. However, a discovery by Don Winter shed more light on the case. Before leaving Panama, Brimminger had sold a machete he owned to a buyer online. During their conversation, he jokingly said he had used the weapon once to finish off a stripper. Although the machete was seized for examination, it didn't initially yield any conclusive evidence. The long-awaited arrest was still pending. Meanwhile, the police had overlooked a crucial detail: Yvonne's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance to make it seem like she was still alive. Before returning to the US, Brian went to Costa Rica and used the missing woman's card a few times, creating the illusion that she had fled there. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, eventually draining the card before discarding it. However, Brian didn't realize that he was caught on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. In July 2013, a year and a half after the woman vanished, her relatives, armed with evidence collected by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally succeeded in getting Brian arrested. At first, he was held on charges of lying and obstructing the investigation, as there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with anything more serious at that time. By then, Christine had given birth to a second son just a week before his arrest, making Brian a father for the second time. The authorities tried to have an open conversation with the suspect, offering him the opportunity to admit to the crime and reveal the location of Yvonne's body. However, Brian consistently denied any involvement. His lawyer also claimed that since there was no body or direct evidence linking Brian to Yvonne's disappearance, there was no proof of his guilt. In the swamp on the island of Kinero, a worker stumbled upon a gruesome discovery just 2 months after Brian's arrest. While taking a shortcut through the underbrush, the worker spotted an army backpack partially submerged in the water. Curious about what might be inside, the worker opened the bag, only to be met with horror at the sight of a human skull. The worker immediately notified the police, who responded and took the backpack into custody for further examination. Inside, they found fragments of a human body, as well as the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been deliberately dismembered, placed in the bag, and discarded in a remote area, likely intended to never be found. DNA testing later confirmed that the human remains belonged to Yvonne. However, many of her limbs were missing. Further examination by pathologists revealed that Yvonne had suffered a brutal beating before her death, including a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. When the unique chop marks on the victim's bones were matched to the machete's blade, it confirmed that the body had been dismembered with this weapon, as each blade has a distinct signature, similar to human fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. In 2014, Michelle Valenzuela got a cancer diagnosis, and after 6 months of intense treatment, realized it was futile. She dedicated her last months to seeking justice for her sister, testifying against Brian and submitting evidence to the court despite her weakening health. Brian assaulted Yvonne in a drunken rage after she discovered his affair, stabbing her to death. He then dismembered her body, killing her dogs, and hid the parts in a backpack in a swamp. Brian fabricated a story about Yvonne leaving him, gaining sympathy from locals, and even found a new girlfriend. However, during the trial, his girlfriend testified against him, and he was forced to admit his guilt, claiming self-defense despite evidence showing he was fully aware of his actions. In the spring of 2016, Brian was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 26 years in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2035. At sentencing, credit was given for his prior service in the Marines, which spared him from a life sentence. Meanwhile, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, maintained her husband's innocence and pledged to stand by him no matter what. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Adam Strong. Adam Strong was born in 1972 in Cornwall, a small town in Stormont County, Ontario. Little is known about his family and early life. He remained single and childless, working as a gas station attendant and a security guard on film sets. Those who knew him described Adam as quirky and eccentric, often coming across as superior to others. He enjoyed debating and arguing to prove his point, but was not typically confrontational. A review of his social media profiles revealed Adam's interest in BDSM practices, which he openly discussed and shared photos and videos about. Although he never had a long-term partner, some former partners accused him of being a sadist who subjected them to physical and emotional abuse, leading to the end of their relationships. Adam also had a peculiar hobby of writing reviews of adult films and magazines. It appeared that watching such content was a significant part of his free time. Despite his unusual interests, Adam presented himself as a calm and composed individual, showing no outward signs of a troubled or criminal nature. The story took an unexpected turn 4 months later when, at the end of December, when David Wood's family moved into the house at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa, they were immediately struck by a strange and unpleasant smell. Their downstairs neighbor, Adam Strong, a 45-year-old single man who lived in the other half of the house, reassured them that it was just a minor plumbing issue that he would fix within a few days. Although Adam was friendly and polite in his communication, there was something unsettling about him that put the Wood family on edge. When David's wife tried to welcome him with some homemade cookies, Adam wouldn't even let her into his apartment. Instead, he stepped out into the hallway, closing his door behind him. In that brief moment, David's wife caught a glimpse of Adam's living space, which was in disarray, and the smell inside was overpowering and foul. Adam borrowed cookies from his new neighbor and quickly left. Later, when they met in the yard, he apologized for not inviting her in, explaining that his apartment was a mess due to upcoming renovations. Despite his efforts to be polite, he seemed nervous. As the Wood family settled into their new home, they tried to ignore a persistent smell. However, on December 29th, they called a plumber to fix a sewer blockage, which had intensified the stench. The problem seemed minor, but what the workers found in the pipes shocked even experienced forensic experts. Plumber Sean Funn and his partner began to clear the blockage in the Woods' apartment. Although they were accustomed to unpleasant odors, they were surprised by the terrible smell inside. They soon realized they needed to investigate further and descended to the apartment below, which belonged to a man named Adam. Adam reluctantly let the workers in, apologizing for the mess. The smell was even worse in his apartment, and when the plumbers reached the source of the blockage, the stench became unbearable. Sean, a seasoned plumber, had never encountered anything as foul-smelling as this in his years of practice. However, an even more disturbing discovery awaited him and his team when they decided to clear the pipe. Adam, already on edge, became increasingly agitated, refusing to step away and bombarding the workers with questions about their methods and estimated time of completion. He later claimed he was simply curious, having never witnessed this process before. The specialists tried to brush off his behavior, but their efforts were soon overshadowed by the gruesome discovery of over 10 kilograms of flesh, hair, and bone fragments in the pipes. Sean was horrified to find disfigured and partially decomposed human fingers among the debris. Adam feigned surprise, claiming he had never seen anything so disgusting, and then asked the plumbers if they had any idea how this could have ended up in the sewer pipe. Sean decided to call the police immediately to report the disturbing discovery. He informed them that he had likely found human remains and provided the address. He made sure Adam didn't touch or disturb anything, preserving the evidence. When the officers arrived, they quickly confirmed that Sean's suspicions were correct. Human flesh had been extracted from the pipes. The police then spoke with the Adam. He admitted that a woman's body had been stuck in the pipe. He even revealed that other body parts were stored in his refrigerator's freezer. Upon investigation, the police found a severed head and limb fragments packed in plastic bags, which were too large. The house was extremely filthy and cluttered, with a kitchen filled with dirty dishes and rotting food, as well as trash covering the floor. Empty pizza boxes were scattered around, and numerous magazines of an explicit and masochistic nature were present among the mess. Various adult toys, gags, whips, handcuffs, and restraint devices were also discovered. Adam Strong was arrested at the scene and taken to the police station for questioning. His arrest puzzled the authorities, as he had no prior run-ins with the law and was not a person of interest to the police. Mr. Adam had resided at 19 Macmillan Drive in Oshawa for over 10 years, dating back to 2007, without incident or complaints from neighbors. The House of Horrors at 19 Macmillan Drive, Adam's residence, was secured and guarded as a crime scene. An initial inspection revealed a complex and time-consuming process lay ahead, with investigators expecting to uncover more shocking evidence. The discovery of a head in the refrigerator was just the beginning. Evidence found at the scene led law enforcement to suspect a connection to Rory Hash, whose torso had been recovered from a body of water 4 months earlier. A tattoo on the neck and subsequent DNA analysis confirmed that the discovered remains belonged to Rory. Further investigation revealed blood-stained clothing and shoes belonging to she, hidden among trash in various rooms of the house. The bedroom was particularly disturbing, with blood traces found on the bed, walls, furniture, and ceiling. These bloodstains were later confirmed to belong to a missing schoolgirl. A dissection table was also found in the kitchen, suggesting it was used to dismember and gut the victim. The entire scene was gruesome, with blood, skin particles, hair, and bone fragments scattered everywhere, causing nausea in those who witnessed it. The bathroom was extremely dirty and unsanitary, with signs of a violent crime visible everywhere, including dirt, blood, and broken fixtures. The toilet was dismantled and lay in a corner, surrounded by garbage. It appeared that the perpetrator, Adam, had attempted to dispose of a body by cutting it into pieces and flushing them down the sewer. However, he encountered a blockage and, when his attempt to fix it failed, left the scene in disarray. Inside the house, a large number of sharp objects were discovered, which likely had been used to dismember the victim. Some of the objects, including knives, still had blood on them. Further analysis of the evidence, including DNA samples, revealed that Adam had semen on fragments of the victim's body, which had been found in the refrigerator. Rory Hash was born on July 9, 1999, in Oshawa, Ontario, to Shannon Dion, a single mother. Rory's father was not present in her life, having left before her birth. Despite this, Rory grew up in a loving and supportive family environment provided by her mother and maternal grandmother. Rory's family had an unconventional background, with her maternal grandfather founding and leading the motorcycle club Satan's Choice. He was also a skilled boxer with connections to organized crime. Additionally, Rory's uncle was a member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club and led a troubled life, frequently encountering legal issues. However, this did not affect Rory's childhood, which was remarkably peaceful and carefree. Rory excelled academically and had a passion for dance, winning awards in competitions. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, responsible, and compassionate. At the age of 13, Rory earned top honors as a cadet in her local army unit, showcasing her exceptional qualities from a young age. At 15, Rory's life took a downward turn. A friend introduced her to drugs, and she quickly became addicted. She started spending time with the wrong crowd, neglected her schoolwork, and eventually stopped attending school altogether. For about a year, her family tried to help her overcome her addiction by sending her to various treatment centers, but she relapsed each time. At 17, Rory ran away from home and began working in the sex trade to support her habit. Rory eventually sought help from a specialized service for teenagers struggling with addiction. With their support, she was able to enter mandatory treatment and turn her life around. She found a job at a local shop, studied remotely to earn her high school diploma, and even started thinking about attending college. Rory also started a serious relationship with a boy named Anthony, and they decided to move in together in the spring of 2017. When Rory discovered she was pregnant, she was nearly 18 and felt ready to take on the responsibility of motherhood. Her mother supported her decision, but was unaware that Rory had started using illicit substances again. In mid-August, Rory met with Crane at a shopping center. Crane had been keeping an eye on her for 18 months to ensure she didn't fall back into her old habits. During their meeting, Rory revealed that she had started using drugs again and had lost her job a month prior. She also admitted to exchanging intimate favors for money or drugs. Crane was deeply concerned and promised to help. He asked Rory to wait while he made a call to arrange for her to be hospitalized. However, when he returned, Rory was gone. The next day, Rory's mother and uncle took her to the hospital after finding her in a state of incoherence due to substance use. They left her in the emergency room queue for about an hour, but when they returned, Rory was nowhere to be found. Security footage showed that she had simply gotten up and walked out of the hospital. Her family reported her missing the following day, but despite a thorough search and widespread social media attention, Rory was never seen again. Rory's exact circumstances of arrival at Adam's house are unknown, but it is probable that she went there seeking drugs in exchange for sex. The investigation started when Adam informed the police about the location of Rory's remaining body parts. Initially, investigators anticipated Adam would admit to the crime, but when he was taken to the station, he became uncooperative, refused to answer questions, and denied any involvement in Rory's death, all while remaining calm. The only charge filed against Adam was desecration of a body, as there was not enough direct evidence to link him to the murder. Despite his lawyer's efforts, Adam was not granted bail and stayed in jail until his trial. Investigators attempted to get Adam to reveal more information by provoking an emotional response, but he remained cautious and avoided discussing Rory's visit to his house and his potential involvement in her death. However, Adam freely talked about his interest in bladed weapons and his large collection of knives. A search of Adam's house uncovered a significant piece of evidence, a dirty hunting knife hidden in a closet with dried skin fragments that appeared to be human. DNA testing revealed that the samples on the knife did not match Rory's, but belonged to someone else. It took several months to identify the person, but by July 2017, investigators had confirmed that the DNA on the knife belonged to Candace Fitzpatrick, she who had gone missing about 10 years earlier. Candace shared many similarities with Rory Hash. Both struggled with addiction and had run-ins with the law. They came from troubled families and often ran away from home, sometimes disappearing for months at a time. To survive, they would often exchange sex for food and other necessities. Candace was born in 1989 and was 18 when she disappeared. Her family did not realize she was missing until almost 2 years later, by which time any potential leads had gone cold. Many people believed that Candace's lifestyle and social circle meant she could have gone anywhere. For 10 years, her parents thought she might have run away and would eventually return home. However, news from law enforcement in 2018 destroyed their hope of ever seeing their daughter alive again. A striking feature of the case was the physical resemblance between Candace and another victim, who was the same age. The police believed they had caught a serial offender. The suspect, Adam, also confessed to harming Candace. However, Adam refused to provide information about Rory unless the police agreed to improve his prison conditions. He wanted a private cell, a large TV, internet, and his favorite meals. Although law enforcement was outraged by Adam's demands, they agreed in order to gain valuable information. Adam began by sharing his troubled childhood, revealing that he was abused by his stepfather from age 5 and started harming animals at age 7, deriving physical pleasure from these acts. He also discussed his unusual intimate preferences and expressed frustration at not finding a partner who shared these interests. When discussing Rory, Adam described in detail how he had dismembered her, seemingly taking pleasure in the act, but later regretted his plumbing had failed him. However, when questioned by police, Adam denied responsibility for her death, claiming she had died from an overdose and he had only disposed of the body. When asked about Candace, a case from 10 years prior, Adam was caught off guard and attempted to learn how the police had discovered the connection. Upon hearing about the human remains found on an old knife, Adam became subdued and regretted not taking better precautions to avoid detection. He admitted to meeting Candace but denied killing her. Despite a lack of evidence to support his claims, Adam unintentionally incriminated himself during the investigation. In an attempt to gain sympathy, he shared his account of events. However, when informed that the victim, Rory, was pregnant at the time of her death, Adam strongly denied this fact. The police noted that the pregnancy was in its early stages, and therefore not visibly apparent. Adam claimed that he would have noticed if she was pregnant, sparking a realization among the investigators that he would stop at nothing to argue his point. To uncover more information, the police told Adam that Rory was pregnant, which led him to attempt to prove the contrary. In his eagerness to refute this, he shared graphic details about how he had personally examined her body and held her reproductive organs in his hands. Adam's account was detailed and included his physical sensations, describing the flesh as soft and warm. At one point, he even mentioned feeling a pulse. These statements raised suspicions that Rory may have still been alive at the time. Unfortunately for Adam, his entire narrative was captured on camera, and his incriminating statements were presented as evidence in court. When confronted about his earlier statements, Adam tried to retract his previous admissions, but it was too late. The defendant, Adam Strong, refused to reveal what he had done with Candace's body, and despite extensive searches, her remains were never found. Investigators also failed to identify any other potential victims. During one of the final interrogations, Strong showed no remorse, saying, "I don't know if it matters, but I'd like to extend my condolences to her parents." During the trial, Strong's lawyers argued that he was mentally ill and therefore not responsible for his actions, claiming he needed medical treatment rather than punishment. However, the court had to decide whether he was sane and accountable for his crimes or if he should be committed to a psychiatric facility instead of serving time in prison. A psychiatric evaluation found that although Strong had certain mental health disorders, he was aware of his actions and could be held legally responsible. Strong's trial began in September 2020, 3 years after Rory's death and 12 years after Candace disappeared. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and desecration of Rory's remains. Although he never admitted guilt, the evidence found in his home and his statements during interrogations confirmed his involvement in these horrific crimes. 4 of Adam's former partners testified against him, describing his cruel and violent behavior. The prosecution presented evidence that Adam had lured 2 women to his home with promises of money in exchange for intimate services that catered to his specific preferences. Once they were in his home, he would immobilize and torment them for an extended period. In the case of Rory, he likely killed her during the ordeal because he feared she would report him to the police. On September 4th, a signal from Adam's phone was detected near the city harbor, where he had discarded Rory's torso, hoping the current would carry it away. In April 2021, Adam Strong was found guilty of murdering Candace Fitzpatrick and Rory Hash, as well as desecrating Rory's remains. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Adam showed little remorse, stating that his prison cell was an improvement over his previous living conditions. 6 months after his sentencing, Adam unexpectedly revealed the location of Candace's remains. Following his directions, the police conducted a months-long search that ultimately led to the discovery of human bones. DNA testing confirmed the skeleton's identity as young Candace Fitzpatrick, and this was officially announced. Investigators now strongly suspect that there may be at least one more female victim in the Adam case. During Adam's initial interrogation, his personal belongings were seized, including a chain with 3 rings. Adam asked for the chain's return, explaining that the rings held sentimental value and he didn't want to lose them. Relatives of Rory and Candace later identified 2 of the rings as belonging to their daughters, but the origin of the 3rd ring remains unknown.